Welcome back to the Iron Sights podcast. I've got Josh and Kenny from CALFIA. We're going to talk about CALFIA, what these gentlemen do with the organization. I am super stoked to have you guys here. There's been a lot of anticipation with this. Josh and I got connected probably about 6 weeks ago, something like that.
Yeah.
And
I would say about then.
Shout out to Jay Wadsworth. He's the guy that put us together. He was on the show previously. When the audience hears you guys and what you're talking about, they'll make the connection if they know Jay and Effective Fitness Combatives and the things that he's doing in law enforcement in the industry. So shout out to Jay. I'm just going to kick this right off and kind of turn it over to you guys. This is kind of what I always start my guest with, which is I'm going to let you talk a little bit about yourself, just kind of give the Reader's Digest version. You can kind of start and finish wherever you want. Let's talk about you guys first, and then we'll talk about how we wound up here with regard to the organization you guys work for and stuff. So you can start and finish wherever you want. You just might have to be a little bit patient because I might cut you off to get maybe some clarification on what you're talking about or get some context. So Josh, let's start with you, man.
My name is Joshua Coleman. I'm a current deputy sheriff here in California. I work for the Napa County Sheriff's Office. I've been a police officer in California for about 18 years, but about 20 years in law enforcement experience. I started when I was 21 years old working for the Vallejo Police Department as in like a cadet training program.
That's just up the road from here. Mm-hmm. Probably, 45 minutes.
Traffic time. Yeah.
It's actually the worst stretch of freeway in California, as far as I'm concerned. That 880 going up that direction, man, it's awful.
Yeah. Well, he spends a lot of time in LA, so he'd probably argue with you. But
I lived there for a while. It's bad, but I don't know. I think it's a close second if it's worse.
Definitely. So I worked there for about 3 years in the cadet training program. Went to the Oakland Police Academy. Graduated Oakland Police Academy. Worked for the Vallejo Police Department. Went through bankruptcy there. Left.
The department did.
Yeah, the department.
Yeah, that was a rough time, man.
Yeah. So I had to go find work. Went to the Napa Police Department. Worked there for about 3 years. That's how I met Kenny. And worked. Then I ended up lateraling back to the Vallejo Police Department.
Okay.
Worked there for about 7 years, an additional 7 years, and then I went through some things with law enforcement, just trauma stuff, and I just decided that if you live in California or you live in the Bay Area, then you know that the city of Vallejo has dealt with some trying issues, and I just decided that better quality of life, went up to the Napa County Sheriff's Office. That's where I've been working. But as far as my career goes, I've worked patrol, narcotics enforcement, detective work, and currently I'm actually assigned as a school resource officer.
I just spent a bunch of time with a bunch of those guys. That's actually interesting. I think it's what's the word I'm looking for here? I think it's a role that I don't think most people pay probably enough attention or respect to.
So
for a lot of reasons. And so I also think it's one of the most important roles you can play as a police officer now that I've had a little bit more education on it.
So myself included, there's a huge stereotype with school resource officers within the law enforcement profession.
Is it deserved?
Partly. I think, just based on the way that assignments are weird. You have your big assignments that everybody wants, and then you have those assignments that like get a bad rap that certain people are just like, man, I don't want to go over there. So I think law enforcement's kind of done a terrible job of hyping up and utilizing that assignment to attract people, to attract high functioning people to that position.
Got it.
Doing the position for the last 3 years, I realized like myself, I had a stereotype about the position. But yeah, it's I think it's probably one of the most important positions that law enforcement has, especially in current times, especially with all the things that are happening with high schools and schools now, current times. But essentially, you have the ability to be a police chief of a mini city. My school is about
good point
1,700 people. 1,700 students, and then like about 100 to about 200 kids. So you got about 2,000 people on campus, and you deal with all of the different things. Like you can step into a forward role and deal with all of the things from a management standpoint, administrative standpoint, law enforcement standpoint. But because of my investigations background, I do all my own investigations, write search warrants, things like that. But like, not to get too deep in the weeds on that. That's what I'm doing now. 18 years of experience working for the city of Vallejo. A lot of experience in force-related issues.
Okay.
Use of force instructor for about 10 years. That's been the weight of my experience, and my specialty and my expertise is in issues related to use of force. So that's kind of how I've gotten, into the California Force Instructors Association and things like that, is through instruction, teaching police officers about use of force.
We're going to come back to the organization and the things that you guys are doing, what you've done, how you kind of got here, and what you're doing now, and how important it is. And that'll lead us down to a lot of different trails of some things to talk about here. But us going back to the SRO thing for just a second. I think there's such an opportunity there to impact the community in such a dramatic and a dynamic way. I mean, when you're thinking about it, you're thinking about the most sensitive and vulnerable people that exist. Those are kids.
Yeah.
And then obviously the people that are charged with their safety for the entire, 5 days a week or whatever, that being the school administrators, the teachers, the people that are on staff there, and how ill-equipped they are to deal with so many of the issues that exist in today's society, but particularly on school campuses.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned kind of just where we are in the world today with, again, going back to that vulnerability and the things we're seeing with mental illness, and what happens when somebody that is having a bad day, the amount of damage that they can do in such a soft, vulnerable environment like that. And when those things happen, the first people on scene are going to be generally it's going to be the SRO that's there, or it's going to be that beat cop who's in that area that shows up, and having an in-depth knowledge of all the students, the layout, the structure, the people, the plans, the lack of planning, all that stuff. Again, going back to impacting the community, you get to impact parents. Mm-hmm. You can do that in a positive and a negative way, maybe.
Yes, big time.
The kids, which are, if they're all online all day, these days, and what are they seeing? What message are they getting about law enforcement, and how can you influence that?
Big time. Yeah.
And then obviously when you look at the administration, in helping them do what they need to do, what their job, basically description is, while not having to maybe worry about all the other things that happen with kids.
Yeah.
Right? I'm a dad.
I think it's really crazy. I think it's really crazy that being someone who's not a law enforcement officer, that you see all those potentials, because I myself, working as a law enforcement officer, did not see all of those potentials until I was actually doing the job. Now that I'm doing the job as somebody who teaches use of force, who teaches in our Citizens Academy, teaches, civilian, or not civilian, but like citizens, use of force stuff. Being somebody who's very big on positive police interactions and affecting, that's why we're here doing this podcast. It's like, teaching the public about what we do, because we've done a terrible job in law enforcement about, doing that over the last 100 years.
Sadly, I'd have to agree.
I didn't see all the potentials for how impactful you can be as a school resource officer in that way. But like, it is a weird job, as you're sitting here thinking about how, like, I have in the last 3 years experienced school threat incidents, where, with all those things you just talked about, mental health, someone who's having a bad day, some sort of information comes across that this person, identified person, is thinking about doing something. And this is what they're going to do. And then figuring that out. It didn't happen, but like figuring how we're going to solve that problem, temporarily at least. And then seeing that student every day, and having to go check in with that guy and being like, "What's up, man? Like, how you doing, dude? What's going on?" And up until this point in my career, when you show up to a problem, when I've shown up to a problem, I show up to the problem, deal with it temporarily, even if it's like I've been the IO or the investigating officer of the crime, right? Let's say it's a sexual assault or something like that, something egregious. You deal with it. You file the case. You move on. You might show up for the prelim hearing. You might see these people, for a 2-hour court hearing, but then you don't see them or hear from them for another 2 years before jury trial. And then after jury trial, you're done and over with. These incidents, I see these kids every single day. Like every single day I see the victim of a crime, and I'm like, how you doing? How's life? You know, you good? How are your school? How's your grades? Da da da. It's an interesting job.
You actually used the word weird, and when you first started talking about it, I think I could be wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure you said weird, and that was one thing. So I just returned from, and I was mentioning to you guys off air. Sorry, Kenny. We're going to get to you in a second, man.
You're good.
But I was mentioning to you guys off air, I just had the opportunity to go through a 1-day, 8-hour course with a group of SROs and a training group called Valor Threat Solutions and his partner, Gray Men. And Jamie Gissel's a guy I've had on the show, and I had him on the show to very specifically talk about active shooter, active threats on school campuses, also in other areas, but I really want to talk about the school thing. And you'd mentioned something there about that I see this stuff. I'm a dad, I'm a dad 2 times. I got a stepdaughter, and I've been in situations, and I've seen how things get handled.
Yeah.
I remember being a student. I was in high school, junior high, elementary school once. Things are different. Yeah. I'm almost 50 years old. I think things are different, but they're not.
Yeah.
They're very much the same problems. Maybe they escalate a little bit differently, and there's more opportunity in some cases for things. But you just mentioned something there that I think I know at this point to be very true. And it's what you were just talking about there. And it's about your relationships that you have with these kids or with these people. Let's just call them people, to be respectful, but they are kids. They are not fully wired yet.
Yeah.
And in a lot of situations, I'm sure you may even be in like a mentoring situation where you're having a conversation with a kid about getting his act together on his bad day or whatever. And like, hey man, this is the consequence of the actions. And if you handle yourself differently, like this may come out a different, I don't want to make up a story, but my point of saying this is in this course that I attended, there was a scenario presented where, and I don't want to give it away, but let's just say the SRO was then brought into a situation with the acting principal and a student who, some information had come out about maybe having a weapon on campus and so forth. And I'll just say this, the officer had to react based on what they knew. And this was somebody that the way the scenario was put together, that they had been doing that. They know this kid.
Right.
They know their parents.
Right.
They know their sister, that's also on campus, who's the good kid or the other troubled kid. And they know what their situation is at home. And they had to make a decision about use of force with this subject in this scenario, and then go through the thought process of all of those things. It was mind-blowing to me. I hadn't considered that part until then. And that's the only reason I can say what I'm saying, because it kept me awake at night. I sat back and I listened, I listened to their responses. I watched their actions. I watched 20 people go through this and how they responded to it.
Yeah.
And that was the thing that struck me. It wasn't what they did. It's how they were going to have to think through the process in the split second, knowing that they know this person and they're going to have to come back to work the next day.
Yeah.
Regardless.
Yeah.
So, anyhow.
I mean, that's something that you have to confront, but you have to confront that mentally
way ahead of time, which was the point of the scenario.
Yeah. You have to make peace with that That has to be something that you decide and make peace with way before you ever get to that point.
I think mindset was I know mindset was a large part of that whole training course, and that was the reason for doing those things, was to give them some experience.
Which is interesting, because this is taking a different route than I thought we were going to go. But we have time. But it's funny because it has changed my mind about the role of SROs and what we actually do as a profession and who we put there. Because I think the stereotype is that we put rookies, or we put people who
rod
toward the end of their career and don't really want to do anything in those positions. I hate to use the term lazy people, but
retired on duty is what it was described to me.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, exactly. Retired on duty type folks. And it's kind of like a chill, easy position that you go to where you don't have to really do much police work. And, all the real police work is being done by other guys in other units. Is that what you want to put? Is that what we want to put? And so we have a friend, I'll mention his name, Josh Toney. He's a narcotics guy. And he called me randomly out of the blue when the Georgia shooting happened.
Yep.
And he calls me out of the blue and he's like, I don't think we should be putting lazy people at the schools anymore. He's like, I think we should put guys at the schools that have been through things, that have tactical experience, that have
yes, please,
investigative experience, that have, you know, all of these things, these things that we typically look for as markers of high performance for other positions, detectives, narcotics, SWAT team leaders, things like that. We street teams, you know, gang task force, whatever it may be. Those are the people that we typically put in those very forward positions. But the reality is, like, all of us have kids. Most of us have kids. Who would you want to be at the school? You would want a guy. You don't want to put somebody who's untested at the school. You should put somebody who's tested at the school. You know, like you want,
or at the very least trained.
Yeah.
Train for that. So that was the other thing, is we were talking again off air just about the training that happens and doesn't happen. And I'm really glad you gave me the opportunity to sort of ask some of those questions or talk through this, because I think it leads directly into what we're talking about with regard to CALFIA and training and learning and being prepared for things. But to that point, I'm a dad. I have a junior hire that goes to a campus every single day. And I am worried. I am concerned. And I don't live my life in this bubble of, you know, hyper vigilance all the time and thinking that something bad is going to happen at any moment. But I do know the world we live in and the realities that exist. And I ask myself the same question all the time. If I'm training with cops, whether it's on the firearms range, whatever happens to be, it's like, is this the cop I would want showing up if my mom called, you know, 911, or if, you know, if my daughter's at that school? And I think more cops should be asking themselves that question. Right. And that was a question that was posed at this training. Like, are you the cop that you would want to show up?
That question dovetails into so many different things like that. You said, the words you just said are some words that Kenny and I have said related to like other recent case law decisions about, like, so it's like, is that how you would want, if this was your mom or your grandmother that was in this circumstance, is that how you would want them treated in these things? And I think if you think from things from that perspective, it kind of helps. Yeah,
we got to humanize the person, right? Yeah. And the person behind it, but also look at the realities of it. So again, I just thank you I didn't see that coming, actually. I didn't know that was what you're currently doing. So that's why I wanted to go there.
Something I keep a secret to.
No, I think it's
funny. No, but it's funny because like, and I don't do it purposefully. I actually am a very open book type of a person. So I don't, people who know me know that. I don't, it's not that I don't hide it, you know? But it is funny because in this podcast world, cops are very interesting people in the sense that they're very much like, who is this guy? What has he done? Mm-hmm. If he hasn't done these things, if he doesn't check these boxes, I'm not listening to him.
I get it.
The school resource officer box checked is not something that these guys or gals typically want to hear about. But I will say, having done all of those other things, it is the best job that I've done so far. But I wouldn't be ready for it if I was doing this when I was younger.
So that's another thing. I want to come back to that a little bit, just in terms of, you know, you talked a little bit about your background. You guys have been on a lot of podcasts, so I've heard your story several times, and we can maybe touch on a few points when you kind of went through the resume of the things that you've done, because you are right. That is a true statement with regard to how cops size up other cops. And then I think that's trickled over into the civilian world too, with the concerned citizen, with all the availability of things like podcasts and social media, and, you know, the 20-year war we just went through, and people looking at other people's resumes. What insignia did you wear? What hat did you wear? What beret did you have on? You know, whatever, all that stuff. I think it's a true statement. And at the same time, like, there's context in all of that, and that's where things get really cloudy and messy. But again, thanks for allowing me or entertaining me on that conversation. I'd love to talk to you more about that off air, actually. Ken, let's move to you, man. Where do you want to start?
Well, first, thanks for having us.
Oh, you're welcome.
Appreciate it. I'll give the rural Reader's Digest version for me. Been a cop for 13 years. Also work at the Napa Sheriff's Office. So anything we say is not representative of them. It's all our own.
Copy that.
Ideas. 13 years done, more than some, less than most. Right now, I run in a patrol shift. Treasurer for CALFIA.
I knew he was going to do this.
Yeah. You warned me. I'm prepared. I'm prepared.
Yeah. Worked treasurer for CALFIA.
Okay.
And been with him for a couple of years. That's the Reader's Digest.
Okay, so
Reader's Digest version.
So
now this is when you get
Joshua prepped me for this, that you were going to be like a man of few words. But I appreciate that, because when I had you off air, you were not that guy. But I understand it's uncomfortable to maybe talk about yourself and the things you've done. So 13 years, a lot of things happened in 13 years. For those people that are watching this, you've got headphones on so they can't see your Shrek ears. You don't just get those. Talk about that.
Well, so I got into law enforcement through force. Was training with deputies, doing jiu-jitsu, prison jiu-jitsu.
There we go, Kenny.
Judo,
there we go.
some MMA. So that's how I found my way into law enforcement.
Gotcha.
And then from there, I always have been attracted to the force side of it and trying to become as knowledgeable as possible, both legal aspects, physical aspects. And that's kind of
Got it.
how I ended up, not just law enforcement, but with CALFIA.
So with those kind of relationships, and maybe even a little bit of a reputation coming in the direction you were kind of focused on, and that is just trying to understand all the things that there are to know, I imagine that maybe provides opportunities for conversations with certain leaders of certain departments or certain people within the agency, where you might be an attractive candidate to maybe come in and help them with the team that they're on or the things that they're doing. Can you talk a little bit about that? Any kind of special units or things that you did where you gained some experience to then be able to provide context to what we'll talk about specifically with CALFIA?
Yeah, when I first came on, just did the normal patrol thing. And then, because I was gravitated towards force, got on with the use of force team, got onto the SWAT team, still on those teams. And that's...
Okay, got it. The reason I asked that is because I think if you're learning that stuff on the inside, you kind of have to navigate that world. But when I say that stuff, I mean things like combatives type training or DT stuff. But if you're coming from the outside and bringing it in, everybody that I've talked to, and I haven't talked to everybody, but the people that I have talked to that have a like kind of a rich history or depth of knowledge in kind of the application of force, whether that's because they were a grappler and they did that in college and then they got into jiu-jitsu or maybe some other martial arts or whatever else.
Or maybe you were a judo brown belt.
Yeah.
And also a jiu-jitsu brown belt.
Yeah. Kenny said, so
Yeah.
Thanks, Josh, for laying down the resume there. So again, my point of that being is those guys generally thrive in a few different ways, and that is because there is a certain amount of respect that is almost I don't want to say automatically earned, but it's presumed. I think like, okay, here's a dude that knows how to handle himself. And that shows up like in academy training and whatever else that you might have had to do. But it shows up in real life. It shows up when the call goes out, you show up. And when I say you, I just mean those that may be like you, and you're not afraid to get in there and you can clearly handle yourself. Right. And that means something, right? And then that gets talked about, and that's important. That is important in terms of culture. And then obviously within teams, particularly in culture, when you talk about SWAT teams or maybe defensive tactic teams or however it's defined, maybe at your agency, where they're looking for leaders that can, maybe it is the quiet, silent type, but when the tones go off or whatever happens, that dude's there and he's going to be able to handle his business. And I think probably speaks largely to why, or the role that you're playing in the organization now. We can kind of shift to that a little bit, because those dudes are really important. It's really important to have guys that when they speak, people listen. Because if they can handle themselves in all these other environments, they can handle themselves physically, they can handle themselves psychologically, they can handle themselves emotionally, in a very practical way. Those are the dudes that you want on your team or in the corner when the fight's on. I mean, literally, but also maybe in a legal battle or in a debate or in a confrontation that may exist between people within an agency, people outside an agency, the public, because they're going to be that voice of reason in the end. And when they do interject or inject something into the conversation, it's generally taken pretty well and backed up, which is another thing. There's not usually questioned in a confrontational kind of way by the members of the team. It's like Kenny says it, then Kenny said it.
Yeah,
we're good.
Or sometimes not, right? Or sometimes
sure.
I think not to get in the middle of his stuff, but something that we found within our organization is that we have the industry, we've cultivated this network of industry thought leaders.
Mhm.
And what we find consistently is that we find these guys from different corners of California, and we're like, this guy is the guy. How are you viewed at your agency? Excuse me. And they're like, yeah, no, I'm shut out.
Mm.
You know, and it's like, wait, so I won't say anybody in particular, but let's say, for example, they happen to own or run a major training group that's popular and used, you know, up and down the state. And it's like, well, how did people view you at your agency? No, nobody wanted to hear from me because they were continually annoyed by this person going, hey guys, I think we're going the wrong direction. Hey guys, I think we're going the wrong direction. Hey guys, I think we're going the wrong direction. People are like, shut up.
Despite him being right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's another interesting thing here, and then we can move on to CALFIA, and that is interesting that things like judo, particularly BJJ, teach you the lessons that allow you to deal with that in a way, I think, like the loss or the confrontation, and just be and kind of, I don't want to say shrug it off, but be able to deal with it, again, psychologically, physically, emotionally, in a practical and logical kind of way. I mean, because you're used to being, you know, beat up a little bit, right? Like that's part of the journey. You have to be able to take that. So how you view maybe the negative that may come from it, from being pushed back on, is maybe much different than the person that doesn't get it because they've never been through hard things, or they have very, very few hard things in order to be a brown belt in either of those two things. That's a lot of investment of time and resource in order to get there. But again, you don't get people don't generally hand you that. You have to earn it, and that's a whole other topic and conversation. But let's talk about CALFIA. Explain to the audience what it is. Let's just start high level, and then we can kind of dig into what it is that you got, how you guys got here, and then what you're doing and how you've impacted.
I'm gonna let Ken.
Yeah, Ken,
You go for it.
we're gonna have a fight. We're gonna have a fight right here on the Iron Sights podcast.
Yeah.
Well, you should talk about it because you are the one that brought it to our department initially.
Yeah, but I mean, you know, I think we're past that. But so I'm the vice president of the California Force Instructors Association.
There we have it.
But of both of us being, you know, we're friends. If you didn't get that, he was on the board before I was on the board.
Okay.
So like I was teaching across the state. I was teaching threat assessment, de-escalation. Post has, you know, their post-course schedule of classes that they want people to teach. And I was teaching one of those, filling a position. And I met some folks that had a small association in Southern California. And then the association's ideas were in line with what I was interested in. And that was just the proselytizing of information related to use of force. And there were some key words that when I first met the founding member of the association, which is Tracy McKenzie out of Newport Beach, he said, no one ever asks us. No one ever asks us our opinions. No one ever asks us for our input. And when he's saying us, he means the subject matter experts, which is a term used in law enforcement to identify another term is a person most knowledgeable, PMK. So a SME or a PMK essentially is a person within the department who has a specific expertise and instruction and training and background in a certain subject.
Copy that.
But when it comes to use of force issues, very commonly administrators don't ask when it comes time to, you know, change a use of force policy, or they're looking at a specific incident and they don't like the outcome of a specific incident. Commonly, they're not asking the SMEs or the PMKs their opinion about the incident.
Okay, so who are they asking?
Themselves.
Or they're not asking anybody.
Or they don't ask. Or you just, you know, oftentimes what happens is like, gosh darn it, I promoted, I'm the captain.
You're going to make the decision.
I'm in charge of this now, so I'm going to do what I like and what I think, you know, regardless of whether or not you have the background, training, expertise to make that decision.
Is this isolated to California?
No.
This is everywhere. So when we talk about a use of force organization within law enforcement, this just doesn't exist. So, and what I mean by that is, okay, so here's my personal experience. I have been to a Tactical Police Officers Association couple things. right? A couple conferences to understand that, okay, this is a group, this is a membership group or an organization within that spans many organizations, so many agencies. My probably most in-depth experience was in Texas. So the Texas Tactical Police Officers Association. I was very impressed actually with how they were running. It was run like a business. It was all about education. It was about educating their officers to with regard to training in all different aspects, equipment, what's kind of up and coming.
Yeah.
Also, it encouraged a collaboration across agencies and departments, like best practices, talking through all kinds of different scenarios, debriefs on things that had happened. So they're sharing this information, this knowledge. It's not isolated, and it's getting out there. And there was a lot of congruency there, and I found that to be very interesting. And there was also, I think there's another interesting part of it is like they call it a brotherhood if you want, but I think it's more than that. I think what I witnessed was people recognizing there when they were there, this is something that's bigger than them, which I think is really important, and that they had resources to go to if something came up, whatever it was, like, hey, we want to test this new piece of equipment. Well, we heard agency down the road's already using it. Let's get their thing. Or it was like, hey, this thing happened and there was a shooting or something, right? There's this whatever.
Debriefing some sort of major incident that happened.
Yeah, so that we could share knowledge, right?
So we can learn from it.
So I also understand there's things like narcotics organizations that revolve around this, maybe detectives organizations. I'm sure there's stuff around like canine units. I'm sure they're doing around the canine part of the job. I already mentioned SWAT. However, when we're talking about like what's happening on a daily basis on the street with the majority of police officers, I mean, every contact could potentially result in a use of force. We are there. Like, I may have to put this person in handcuffs.
Yes.
And so I'm going to have go hands on. And by definition, is that not a use of force?
Yeah. If they acquiesce to it, then it's not. But,
right. Okay.
yes.
Got you. But obviously that is that's an agreement.
Yes.
Right. Between both parties. And if one of those parties doesn't agree, and that oftentimes happens.
Now we're in forced land.
Now you've crossed the line, and there's nobody really addressing this outside of the sergeant who may be in charge of this particular thing, or this somebody within brass that's doing this investigation or writing this policy or whatever else.
Right.
I find that very problematic.
Yeah. So that's what happened. Right. So like I'm standing there talking to Tracy, and he's like, no one ever asks us, and there's no association for this. And I was like, I immediately foresaw the impact that this could have. And I also became like keenly aware of the, I guess I would say, shock that I had that
you didn't realize this?
That I didn't realize this. That no one thought, we were talking offline before this started, but like, if you work in California, it's likely that your agency uses Lexipol for their use of force, for your policy manual. Mm-hmm. And in one of the first, after the definitions, in one of the first paragraphs of the use of force policy, it says that use of force is a matter of critical public concern. And it's crazy to me that if that's true, that there was no larger body working in California or even in the nation, because you talk about TTOA, there's also NTOA, right? There's no larger body or association that has been working behind the scenes, dealing with issues related to use of force, when our profession's title is law enforcement, the operative word being force, right, within enforcement. And it's like, wait, it is the issue that plagues any department. Right. The majority of lawsuits that come through and complaints are going to be related to use of force. And there's no huge association that's advocating on behalf of the practitioners from a education standpoint, training standpoint, legislation, advocacy standpoint, lobbying. There's nothing, and so no one ever asks us, and so that's how it was birthed.
And there's a lot of other things going on at the time in forced land for cops. At that time, when we got involved, when CALFIA was so CALFIA, we had lost the ability to use the carotid restraint.
Right. What's this? What's the bill? Is it
AB 490?
That's 490, right?
Yeah,
Okay, gotcha.
AB 490.
It wasn't. It was an executive order though. It wasn't
At first, and then it was, and then executive order. Then it became AB 490. Got rolled into that or anti
Here in California
bill. Yeah. And then also we had our use of force authority for California changed, and it was sold to departments largely like everything's all right. Nothing's really changed much. We've codified some case law, some Graham Connor, some Tennessee Gardner stuff, but it's pretty much business as usual. And we're like, this just went from 2 paragraphs to 2 pages. No, that can't be right. No way. And there was no group here being like, no, it's changed. Like it's changed. There was some one-off people. There was thought leaders who were ahead of it. Like, oh, it's changed dramatically. And it was about kind of pulling all those people together to get the message out. It's like to everybody, all law enforcement, like, no, it has changed.
So in fact, actually, it was quite the contrary. Not to dime anybody out, but I'm a big proponent of speaking truthfully and honestly about these issues, and even at my own detriment sometimes. And that the reality truly is that law was brought forth by Shirley Weber, who authored the bill twice. It was AB 931 the first time, and then it was AB 392 the second time. It got killed in legislation the first time. And then in the second time, it was going to win. And so the lobbying groups, Police Officers Research Association of California and California Peace Officers Association, were working along with some other attorneys to try to fix some of the language. And I wasn't in those rooms, so I don't know what those conversations happened. I don't know all of the ins and outs, but I do know what was told to us through, by CPOA and by PORAC, and some other attorneys that.
When you say us, do you mean officers in general?
Yeah,
okay, gotcha.
Right. Because everybody wanted to know, like it was very much a sky is falling bill. And we're like, oh no, things are changing.
So before you go on, just let me time you out for a second. What are the consequences of not understanding the language in that bill as an officer on the street?
Prison.
Okay, so this goes from a violation of policy, right? Like maybe a department policy or an order to criminal, to a criminal thing?
Incorrect. It goes from, So you get involved in something on the street as a police officer.
Okay.
Your department's most likely going to look at it and go, okay, sergeant's going to be like, okay, we're fine, whatever. The citizen is going to bring forth a claim,
okay,
either in state court or in federal court. If most likely going to bring forth in federal court under a Fourth Amendment claim. When they bring forth that claim, it'll go through the federal court process, and maybe it gets settled out before it ever goes to trial. Maybe you get qualified immunity, and it doesn't. The ruling for summary judgment in the department's favor, and it's done. Worst case scenario, it goes up through the district courts and ends up in the Ninth Circuit, and the Ninth Circuit issues a ruling which instructs law enforcement to act differently. Right?
Okay.
I shouldn't say worst case scenario. Sometimes that's a good thing, right? Sometimes the vetting out of the rules is something that
is good. Is positive. Yeah,
right?
gotcha.
Graham Connor's a great example.
Because it really defines, the black and white versus the gray.
Right. And so over time, when I first became a police officer, no one ever talked about the fear of being prosecuted, because you're out there acting on behalf of the public, and you're acting as an agency of the government with the law on your side. Mm-hmm. There's really no fear of being prosecuted. I'm doing things
unless you're being a criminal with a badge.
Correct.
Which is not what we're talking about here.
Yeah, one in a million, right? Like, I don't know, probably less. It's probably more than that, actually. But
I'm just trying to make a distinction
for
here.
Sure. Yes.
Right?
And so, and I'm not that guy, so I'm not worried about being criminally prosecuted.
That's my point.
Right.
Yep.
149 of the Penal Code is assault under the color of authority. Right. And it's like, it's something that is different from trying to effect an arrest to overcome resistance or prevent an escape, right? That's malicious, but I'm not acting with malicious intent, so I'm not worried about it. And no one ever talked about the fear of being prosecuted. The fear was well, you could be sued, right? Well, okay, when you get sued, we're talking about the department is going to defend you. They're going to have this.
As long as you're within policy.
Yeah, as long as you're within policy. The department's city attorney or the city or the municipality, county attorney is going to work on your behalf and defend you in court, right? Your actions and the department's actions. Well, what the outcome of that is that you may have some new rules that come out. As long as you're not in violation of a clearly established law, then you're going to be fine. If something comes out of that wasn't clearly established, well, then the courts are going to establish it. And then moving forward, you don't do that stuff anymore.
Okay.
Right? There's no personal risk to that. What changed with, and I don't know why anybody didn't see this happen. Like, I don't know why we called it a black swan event. Like, I don't know why it didn't occur. What was being told to us by these larger advocacy groups is that it just codifies case law, right? That's true.
What does that mean?
But it codifies case law from civil courts
That's what I mean.
into criminal law.
Okay.
So previously, if you, let's take a Miranda issue, right?
Okay.
If you violate Miranda that was clearly established and they bring forth a claim in federal court against you and you knew it was clearly established and you violated Miranda, your department's going to pay out money, lots of money.
Yep.
Okay. But let's say they made the Miranda law or the Miranda case law issue a criminal penal code that if you violate it, you've now committed a crime.
Mm-hmm. Now you're on your own.
Now you're going to jail for violation of Miranda. That's what happened with AB 392, is they took codified case law from Hayes, Nahad Broder, Graham versus Connor, Tennessee Garner, some Sheehan case law out of San Francisco, and they basically created a Frankenstein of all these different case law decisions from federal court, put them in a state penal code. And so what happens is if you violate that law, you've essentially committed a crime, or it can be argued that you've committed a crime.
Okay. So I'm going to time you out here. So people that are trying to follow along here.
We're getting deep in the weeds now.
So I think this is important though. And I'm okay doing that because this is where people that think they know, I'm going to say it, they think they know shit, don't know shit about fuck. Like, because what you're saying here is
this happened within our own administration.
This is my point. I said the word problematic. So obviously, if you're following along at all here, hang in there because we're going to get to a couple of more levels. And you have to understand the context of this or what happened here to understand why CALFIA is so important and why that mission is imperative. Because if you're a cop on the street and you are confused at all about what just happened, that is my case and point, right?
Yeah.
Right? If you're just like, hold on. Because my question in this comes to like, okay, so what is the challenge there? Okay, so now all this has happened. And when did this happen?
2019 was when it was signed into law.
Signed and then it went into effect 2020.
So a lot of shit happening during that time too, right? So
the world was bad year.
The country was on fire.
Yeah,
very bad year.
And by the way, the cases that you're talking about here, right? That were this Frankenstein of cases, cities and towns were being burned down because of the results of those cases. In some cases.
In some cases,
not all of them.
Yeah,
but in some they were
or cases like those.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah.
Okay, that's more accurate. Like those, that's more accurate. And I'm not going to pretend that I know all the cases.
Okay, well, let's just take one in particular. So the impetus for the bill. You like to talk about this? Go ahead. What's his name?
Well, Stephen Clark and the Sacramento shooting. You familiar with that one?
Yep.
So guys running around, cops are chasing him. Around the corner, he points a cell phone at him. They shoot him. They think it's a gun.
Mm-hmm.
Shirley Weber is out screaming that she wants these cops prosecuted. But I think it was Becerra, or no.
No, it was
Beto?
No.
I forget. Well, the AG is going, we can't prosecute these
Mary Ann Schubert
in Sacramento. Yeah. Well, there's multiple there's DAs and Congress people going, we can't charge cops because of the use of force authority. We can't charge them. We want to be able to charge them for these types of shootings. So the Stephen Clark shooting was the impetus to push this new legislation and reform our 835A, our authority to use force. Yeah. And the first one that was what you mentioned before, AB 931, was very, very problematic, didn't make it, and then was getting the support for the 392, which changed our authority to use force, which is 835A of the California Penal Code.
So if just to your point, Sacramento was literally being burned down and looted over Stephon Clark, which then spurred the momentum for Shirley Weber to bring forth this bill, because in her press release, I think her first name's Marianne, but her last name's Schubert. She stated, under current law, I cannot bring charges against this officer.
Right.
So they're like, cool, change the law. So they did. And in changing the law, after that, you see an explosion of chargings.
So, and what's happening during this time, obviously, there's a lot of stuff happening during 2020. Mm-hmm. If I went through the academy...
You want to talk about it?
I prefer not to. Anybody that listens to the show has probably heard me go off on it a few times. We had a little moment before we started recording. I prefer not to. But let's say, okay, so this happens in 2019, goes into effect in 2020. Got it. So if I went through the academy in 2018 and I was in my 4 hours of instruction or whatever was given, basically this case law, so that I understand my use of force policies and whatever, how would I have gotten the information that this had changed, or how was it handed down to the officer on the street? Because if I'm only an officer a couple of years, I'm probably just getting settled into my new job right after my FDO program and riding around in my own district and whatever, doing my thing, learning the job. So at what point would I be given this information, and how would it be delivered to me that everything has changed?
It probably wouldn't have been, because it depends on where it came from. There was people who were saying it didn't change. Very few people being like, there is a massive change here. The most part that we were hearing was, that's not a big deal, or, the stuff there's a question about, it'll get worked out through the courts. It was just kind of a hold your breath and pray, or hope it happens to somebody else, to really see what this bill actually means for law enforcement.
If I was mechanically, what happened was that what typically happens is bills change or laws change, and then someone in the department is kind of highlights like the way that the system is kind of broken up a little bit, like the way that things work is dependent upon how the department is functioning, right? So if the law changes, someone in the department has to be paying attention to the fact that the law changed. And
Step one.
And then that person so then the recognition that the law changed, what comes down to the department has to be as good as the person that's in charge of seeing that the law changed. It could just be a department email that said, just so you know, this law changed, right? Which I think is pretty much what happened. I think that the departments across California were kind of like, what does this mean? And they looked toward the associations, the larger associations in California, PORAC and CPOA, for guidance on those things.
Got it.
They looked to POST for guidance on those things. Actually, this is what happened. So they looked toward California Peace Officer Standards and Training. If you're watching and you don't really know what that is, every state has a state body that is in charge of police officer standards and training.
Minimum standards.
Yeah.
In California, it's the government governing body created by the state of California, like the DMV, basically, or the medical board or whatever it is, that deals with police officer training and police officer standards. Standards for hiring, standards for maintaining your certificate, and then standards for what you're supposed to be trained in. And everybody says 4 hours, but what they don't realize is, like, it is 4 hours of a bunch of different blocks. So, like, it's not you only just getting 4 hours a year. You're getting 4 hours a year, or sometimes two, or sometimes 1 hour of a prescribed specific state training you have to do. Like, you have to do 1 hour of domestic violence training. You have to do 1 hour of mandated reporter training. You have to do 2 hours of CPR.
The minimum standard.
Yeah.
As you said.
Yeah.
Minimum standards.
So we looked to those. We looked to POST. We looked to PORAC and CPOA are the ones that worked on the bill, lobbying. So we figured they would know the most of it. But the message to us was, this is a win. And their position was, it was supposed to be the necessary standard. That's what That's what Shirley Weber wanted. She wanted police officers only to be able to shoot people or use deadly force when necessary, right? Which we wanted the Graham versus Connor standard objectively reasonable, right? And PORAC and CPOA lobbied to get the word reasonably necessary, and they thought the combination of reasonably necessary was a win.
Would be good enough.
Not realizing, I think, that all of the other stuff that's in it
The
is
language.
So they were focused on this very small thing when there were so many other things that created issues.
correct.
Okay, again, thanks for taking me down that path. Do you want to say something there?
I was going to say about Post specifically, though, because Post put a video out
Yes.
to all of law enforcement with a bunch of DAs talking about it. But they actually put 2 videos out.
Yeah.
That contradicted one another?
Well, the first one, there was attorneys contradicting each other.
Oh,
And that's where you know there's a problem. But so they created it and they put a second one out. And very vague on its information, talking more about necessary and just being...
People didn't know what got unleashed. Bottom line, it got unleashed. The language is so important.
Words matter.
Words are so important. What you say and how it's said is so important. And so people didn't realize the power of the language that was put out, and they didn't know what it meant. It's this is 2019 it got signed. I've read it 1,000 times. At our department, one of our coworkers actually laminated and taped the document, the code section, to the wall of the bathroom so that you're forced to read it every day when you go to the bathroom, because I've read it 1,000 times more, and I still find little Easter eggs in there, and we still argue with each other back and forth because it's written in such a way that's so nebulous that you're like...
It's legal jargon at the end of the day. I mean, it's like anybody... Besides, it's how many pages now? 2 pages?
2 pages.
Yeah, it was 2 paragraphs to 2 pages. So I asked the question about like, how would I find out about this? So unless I'm taking a piss in your agency's restroom,
Yes. That's not good enough, though. Just reading it's not good enough.
That's what I'm saying. Because why? Well,
it's like reading the Bible on your own.
There you go.
It's like reading the Bible on your own.
Anybody that's ever read a legal document, gets maybe 4 or 5 lines into there and it has to go back to the top to start over again and try to decipher it. That's problematic in and of itself. And so again, when I asked about the delivery of the information, how would I find out as a 3-year-old cop or 4-year-old cop, like that my life potentially could be changed today if I go out and do a stop, some type of a routine traffic stop that changes very rapidly or ends up a certain way. Now, all of a sudden I'm a criminal.
Right.
It just like that.
You wouldn't
know.
You really wouldn't have that time.
So I would imagine the other way you find out is when somebody else on your department gets in trouble, right? Or has done something, and then
you find out when it might be your department, but most likely it's gonna be someone else's department.
And I think that was going back to what we were talking about earlier. Like that was some of the thought was, well, we'll see what happens out in the wild. It won't happen here.
In the wild.
Why are you taller than me? Right
in the wild, I put him on the taller chair. Like this worked out good.
I'm like looking up to him.
About time. Even in our organization, there was debates of, okay, it's changed, but how did it change? What are the rules now? So the rules are changed. What are the rules? I don't really know from this, but we think it has it. And then you have San Leandro happen, where Officer Fletcher shot the guy at the Walmart, and then he gets charged. And you're like, oh yeah, okay. So this definitely has changed things. And then after that, you had, I'll say activist DAs like Gascon, Ches Boudin in San Francisco. He charged a whole bunch of officers on previous shootings that have been cleared, reopened them and charged them.
Yeah.
And then it was like, okay, this is definitely
the ACLU sued
Pomona PD. Yeah, because Pomona PD at that time was teaching nothing changed. And ACLU found out, sued them, and got it has changed. It is this necessary standard, and got an injunction to get them to stop teaching it that way. So there's all these little things happening. And at the same time, there were other thought leaders, and a lot of them are affiliated with CALFIA now, who did see it and were piecing it together. And then I don't know how long it took, a year. I would say maybe even a year to really clearly see how drastically it changed.
Probably about 2 years. Honestly, about 2 years. Yeah.
I mean,
there's people who we all, and that's really the crux of the issue is like the way that the system of law enforcement works with individual municipalities that get to decide what they're going to do and how they're going to do it. You can have a guy in charge who's just like, I don't think it has. So you can have a group of people that go, hey, boss, we're your SMEs, and we have looked at this stuff and we think it's changed, and this is what we think it's changed to, and this is what we think we need to do in response. And you could have a guy go like, I disagree. And then you're done.
And then it's over.
Yeah, it's over. And then you're done. And so
where does that leave that group of people to go?
Lost.
Yeah.
So that's the importance of this association is like, we've just banded together and we just we're creating a behemoth. We're creating an advocacy. We have created an advocacy group for the singular most important issue in law enforcement in modern time, and actually of all time, which is it is the friction point between a government agent and a citizen. It is
turn on the TV.
It is the most, and to your point, you've done some work with, some tactical officer associations and things like that. Their work falls under our work.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yep.
When a SWAT team is called out to, he's a SWAT, he didn't say it, so I'll say it. He is a assistant SWAT team leader, right? So he knows about that world too. There's so much he didn't say. I'm so mad at him right now. I'm internally mad. We're going to talk about it on the way home. But the canine issues, the SWAT issues, all of the issues related to any of these intersections where police are intervening into the lives of an American citizen, it all relates to force. And therefore, it all falls under our umbrella of the things that we're advocating for and working toward.
Which also falls under the United States Constitution.
100%.
America.
Thank you. Yes.
Right? So
thank you for saying that.
Yeah, because it's not like people are maybe trying to isolate this to California. I asked very upfront, is this isolated to California? No, it is not.
Yeah.
Right.
Which is why we have people from different states. We have people from different countries that are realizing that there's nothing out there there's no one out there that's doing what we're doing. And we have officers from Canada. That are members of CALFIA.
Maine, West Virginia.
Maine, West Virginia, Texas. We have members from all over this country that are like, wait, they're doing what? We need that. And I think they realize that because California's laws are pushing out into the rest of the country.
It's I call it cancerous. And if you don't believe me, like you're sitting on wherever you're sitting on whatever edge of the country or whatever place, if you think it's not coming to your town, just wait. It's coming. Just ask Oregon, just ask Nevada, just ask Washington. It's coming. Ask Illinois, right? And what's going on there. And I think that's getting cancerous just there. And the states that's touching is starting to spread. I don't want to get too deep into the rabbit hole. What I want to ask next is specific to CALFIA's mission and just kind of what you guys are trying to get accomplished. You kind of talked about how we got here. Where are you now, and what are you able to get accomplished right now with what you've got?
Well, with what we've got now, our biggest thing is we have a yearly conference that we do. Now it's 3 days. Now it is post approved, and we have a lot of these thought leaders for different aspects of force come in and cracking eggs of knowledge on members. And I know that that's beneficial from talking to people after our first one. So from the last one we just had 2 months ago, that they have gotten information from that has benefited them. We've done some advocacy stuff. We tried, like when AB 490 came out, the canine build, last one's AB 742.
Very familiar.
Opposition letters for that. So we're trying to work our way into that world.
How do you do that? Like, how do you do it? I mean, holding a conferences is one thing, but like getting yourselves in front of the legislation or involved in the legislation, that's a whole different deal. How does that work?
Well, and we're not there yet. At some point, maybe we'll do a pack or something it's as easy as just writing a letter of opposition. We're this organization, force drugs organization. There's this bill. We don't like it for these reasons. We oppose it.
Yeah, we are uneducated when it comes to grassroots advocacy, and we have been working on learning how to do that. There's things that we do really well. Training. Most of us are all instructors. And I mean, the title is California Force Instructors Association, but it's not an association for instructors only. It is for every police officer. The membership is $50. It's not that much money. I mean, guys spend more money on Starbucks.
Don't get me started. I'm a gym owner, man.
Yeah.
Don't get me started on what people spend their money on.
Yeah. So
important shit.
Yeah. So it's for every law enforcement officer. If you're out there doing the work, training wise, we do a really good job. The advocacy stuff is what we're learning to deal with. Our association obviously is going to have to grow in the ways that we do those type of things. With that, he mentioned PAC, like a political action committee. Like those are things we're trying to educate ourselves on. Fundraising, those type of things, and then networking and getting in front of the right people. But as we grow, those things are happening organically. Getting to know people. This last year at the conference, we had Sheriff Chad Bianco came and was on a panel discussion for us. And
Bianco for governor.
Yeah, those things were not. Yes. Those things were not possible 3-4 years ago, and now all of a sudden they are. So but again, like letters of opposition, working with Post. Post does a lot. Pretty much anytime they're going to change something or they're going to add something to like learning domains, which are the books in an academy, the learning, how do I describe it?
So
subjects within the police academy, and they're broken into learning domains. And anytime they're going to change a learning domain on like use of force or whatever, they call in subject matter experts.
And they're coming to you guys for this, or you want them to?
No, they have. Yeah, with regard to developing a course for positional asphyxia. When the positional asphyxia bill went into it, Ken, myself, and former President Tracy McKenzie we were in Carlsbad, and we sat in a room for basically 3 days crafting language around that, training on what that means.
Gotcha.
Right? Like he said, writing letters, in opposition to the K-9 bill. An issue crops up, such as I think the most recent issue that's kind of cropped up is like Gracie University, Henner Gracie. They came up with this technique, physical restraint technique, and for some reason, it just like things just blew up, and it blew up in a lot of different ways. It blew up in the jiu-jitsu community, which we haven't even talked about.
Glad you brought it up.
Yeah, so it blew up in the jiu-jitsu community, and then in the law enforcement community for a couple of different reasons. And so then it popped up on our members were like, "What's going on with this?" So we had to, as a board, we're like, well, we don't know. So we had to educate ourselves, go to the website, watch the videos, look at what's happening with, they call it the safe rap technique, looking at the language and realize like, okay, yeah, this is something that affects California law enforcement. This is something that affects us from a language standpoint. Well, you said words are very important. And so, we're looking at the language on the website and the language, used in the videos surrounding the technique, and realize like, this is something that's important to us. And we were able to set up a meeting with him and go down and meet with him personally and advocate for California law enforcement by explaining to him our position and our criticisms of what he's saying, and then make changes, right? And fortunately, he was
receptive.
Very, very, very receptive. Very, very dynamic guy. It was a great meeting. We could talk more about that if you have more questions.
No, I do have questions about it. So we're starting to get into the actual, like the hands-on component of use of force, right? We've kind of talked about the case law, how that could obviously impacts what happens once the thing is being done, right? And what the outcome could be. So obviously, if what I was trained to do, what I understand I'm able to do, right, in terms of my use of force policy, or my rules of engagement, if you want to call it that, as an officer. And I've been trained a certain way in whether it's academy or additional post-training that I've been given up until this point to handle a situation this way. And now we've had these dramatic changes, which could impact or have impacted how I was trained and what I was taught at the beginning, right? And let's say I'm a go-getter, get after it type of officer. And so I am training outside of the department or whatever the department or post is requiring me or giving me. or volunteering me to do.
Right.
That being, I'm enrolled in a BJJ school. I am a brown belt, right? I am whatever, like things. There's all these, there's a large dynamic of things that could be happening here. And so if I'm out there and I'm trying to get better at this skill, and I'm also advocating that other officers do this skill, not advocating from the organization's perspective. I'm just saying as an officer in an agency, for my buddies or the guys on my team, if I work on a special team, and we are practicing and we are doing these things, and we are heavily involved in the actual action of use of force on more of a regular basis. And there are certain people that have way more interaction doing that stuff than others, right? And then there's other people trying to get in going, hey, we have some solutions for this. So enter Henner, right? And what he's doing with the Gracie School. I would want to know what those things are, right? And I would want to go out and I would want to see all of these things. I mean, we talked about Jay at the beginning with the EFC.
Yes.
And there's a guy that's coming specifically from law enforcement, right? Right?
Yes.
And bringing that context and understands the case law.
Yeah.
Right? And I know this because I talked to Jay. We didn't talk about a lot of this on his podcast, but man, we talked for hours before and after because he'd flown in for the day and then went out. I was blown away at his depth of knowledge.
Yes.
Not only just with case law from his side of the country, right? But in all of these areas where he's teaching and the conversations that he has to have with those in charge and brass as he's going into these different areas where classes have been booked, right? Where he gets all of a sudden 2 days out from a class. I think it was happening here. I don't remember where it was. It wasn't in California. He was here. He had gotten a call about a class was supposed to be getting taught starting the next day, like a 3-day course. And somebody there it was like the governor got wind of it and was like, what the hell is going on? It was like the governor. Right. And then that got trickled down to him, and he had to make a phone call and sit there with the brass there and explain to him what he was teaching as it relates to case law. My point of this is, I was like, damn, dude, that's a whole other job in and of itself, educating people on educating and so forth. So as the go-getter, I'm out there. I want to be trying to get all this stuff. How do I know where to go? So like a guy like Henner comes in, not coming from law enforcement, right? Not saying the technique is good or bad. I don't know. I'm a white belt. Who am I to criticize? I'm not a cop. I don't know. Yeah. But I've seen the thing 100 times. And I've watched the thing, and I've also watched what Jay does with his group and had in-depth conversation. There are some vast differences here, right? That I see kind of going on. And I also see there's probably a very and I don't know this, but it seems to me there's a disconnect in understanding of what's okay and what isn't okay as it relates to the things that we just talked about for the last hour.
Right.
In terms of this. So when you say it went well and he was receptive, right? That being Henner. What was he receptive to as it relates to the technique or the training, or where California sees this being a good thing or a bad thing? Can you talk about that? Some of the detail?
Our focus was more the language portion of it.
Okay.
Is how he was marketing it. Because that piece is what we felt and what our membership felt. Because this wasn't just a board thing. There was a lot of members that were contacting us, even at our last conference in August, asking us what's going on with this. Are we involved in this at all? And weren't happy with it, with the marketing. And he was very receptive to the suggestions that we had about changing his language and how he marketed it, because we explained it like he's adding to the noise of this asphyxia that's going around California that's based on very debatable science, very loose science, and it's kind of taking away the personal accountability for the suspects who were, eat cheeseburgers for 40 years and, copious amount of controlled substances and want to fight with cops, and then they die, but it's the cops' fault. So he was kind of adding to that noise, and he was very receptive to
unintentionally. He
was doing it unintentionally.
Okay, so this is what I kind of get. This was kind of what I was saying about his background versus maybe a guy like Jay's background.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Like, and there's a difference. So a word on Jay. Okay. So and this is also kind of dovetails back into what you were talking about earlier with asking us our backgrounds and things like that, and like how cops judge, and they're like, who is this guy? What's he done? Whatever. Mm-hmm. So I was in one of Jay's classes. It was just a 1-day class. I haven't been to his certificate, or some of our guys have been to his instructor cert, like a 5-day thing, but I went to a 1-day class actually Ken and I all went, and our boss went to a 1-day class, just kind of see what he was teaching. We're like, yes, this is good stuff. We brought it back up to our agency. So when I knew Jay was the real deal was when he was talking about, and he didn't do it intentionally, but he goes, he's talking with his arms around a guy. And he had him in like just a regular body wrap, gable grip around his waist. And he says something about, and if I'm in this position, like I can feel the gun if he has a gun in his waistband with my forearm, right? Like I could feel it there. I don't necessarily have to grab. I don't have to let go of my gable grip to grab this and I know that it's there. And I'm like, oh, he's been
there before.
Because I'm like, oh, I've been there. I know I've been in situations where I could feel it with my forearm or whatever. I'm like, oh, that's a gun, right? And I'm like, he's been around guns enough and wrestled with people and tried to control and arrest people that have guns. He's been around it enough to have developed the awareness of being able to use his forearm sensitivity to know that it's there. And I'm like, that's something that's special and that differentiates his program from a lot of different programs is the actual lived experience of dealing with the gun threat. Because we talked about jujitsu off air. I know we're going to get into this, but like, it's not the solution for everything. It's a good foundation, but their jujitsu rule sets don't have guns on the mat, right? Like it's a different world. And so the fact that Jay's program specifically addresses the gun threat, both our gun and the suspect's gun, is
an important differentiation.
Is what we were like, he knows what he's talking about. So then on top of that, you add legal understanding, previous courtroom testimony, all this stuff that he's done, having to write the police reports, that in and of itself, yes, you went out and did it, but you had to write a police report. You had to explain your actions. You had to sit in front of somebody or an OIS, officer involved shooting that he may have been in, sitting there and having to answer the questions and be held accountable and have an investigator sit in front of you and ask you the questions. And why did you do this?
Be able to articulate.
And be able to tell them why, right?
It's important.
All that stuff is important. On the other hand, you have people who are experts in their own right on physical control from a standpoint of just jujitsu, right? Like just the simple control of a human being using techniques. It's a science. And I'm not at all taking that away from the Gracie family. They're it, right? The pinnacle of, Jay is a jujitsu black belt, right? So like we have to pay homage to the fact that jujitsu is important, right? And that the Gracie family has a huge contribution to jujitsu that can't even really be described in words, right? The amount of contribution.
I would agree with that
statement. The Gracie family alone helped LAPD develop the arrest control method back in the late 90s and early 2000s, which was the first program in California that deviated from the old Aikido based stuff, right? So like give the man his flowers, okay? But he's never had to wrestle with someone arrest or control someone who's armed in a backyard.
Fair enough.
It's just different.
Fair enough. So again, going back to the technique in and of itself, there's things that I see with that. So correct me if I'm wrong, but there's some things that I saw. So I have questions about maybe how this came up. One is that it's a 2-person thing, right? That at least that's what I get. Am I wrong
yes,
with that? So it's working on the assumption that it's 2 people doing this.
Right.
Every time I've seen it being demonstrated, it's been either no gi or in gi, mostly no gi. Okay. So there's no kit, right? There are no weapons involved on the thing. That's just what I've seen, right? There's a million YouTube videos. I've been through a few, right, of this thing. It also works under the assumption that the person that the subject that we're trying to control here has some level of, let me just say this. So I'll use some sciencey words like soft tissue approximation.
I'm blown away at how much you know about. So this is like a very nuanced, of the world, this issue, this particular thing that cropped up, the safe wrap thing that cropped up, and like certain people became, concerned about it. I mean, I would say probably 80% of my department probably has no idea what we're talking about when we talk about this. The fact that you're not a police officer, but you know about this thing and you know all of the intricacies and what's happening and the drama behind it is wild to me.
I pay attention. So, and to say that, thank you for the compliment. And
it wasn't a compliment.
But the way it comes across to me is like, yeah, I'm paying attention.
Yeah, you are.
So,
you are
and the reason I do that is from the position of a concerned citizen, who also recognizes the realities of the world that we live in, and those realities that are faced on both sides as being a concerned citizen, and those people that serve us tirelessly, that being law enforcement, first responders in general. I'm sort of passionate about it. I have no desire to be a police officer or a first responder now. I do respect what they do, but my point being is I talk to a lot of them.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of really great, intelligent contacts that I can reach out to when something pops up, and that's kind of how this thing came up. And so then I also, as a result of kind of feeling that way and doing this thing, this podcast thing, talked to a lot of people in the combatives world, right? That have done a lot of things.
I saw you had
a lot of things.
You had his name escapes me, from Shipworks. You had
Craig Douglas and his team.
Douglas.
Brian and Scotty were on too. That we actually just dropped that one a week ago when we're recording this. And my point of that being is these are guys that have been through the thing, like as law enforcement officers. Brian in that group, but obviously Craig and what he's done, and learned all the things that they had been taught were not very effective, and had to kind of come back to the other side of it, and to spend 20 years kind of figuring it out. It's not just Craig. There's other guys out there, but Craig's one of them. And so going back, so when I ask the questions, or when I'm having these conversations, I'm really asking them just from a point of curiosity and a level of concern to well, what's really going on? Is this dude just pissed because
it's a different program?
Yeah, it's a different program, and Henry might be taking my business away from me. There's probably some legitimacy there.
Yeah, I think that can't be ignored. I think that there's probably, it's business, it's competition.
I'm being objective about this, and kind of my approach. But when I watch the thing, I'm seeing two people it's a 2-on-1 situation. I'm seeing it being demonstrated with no kit, we're on a mat, right? We're not in a street. We're not on a sidewalk, not in a dirt patch. We're not in a slippery bar or anything like that. We're also, I mentioned the term soft tissue approximation. What am I talking about? You could either be really fat, you could be really, jacked. And the positions that they're putting these people in are somewhat dependent on how big, how flexible, how inflexible, what clothing they may be wearing, a lot of things. I'm not saying it makes it impossible. Mm-hmm. Here's my point of saying that it's a technique that could be very effective. Can we get agreement on that?
Yes.
It absolutely could be. I think
we both were in it. He demonstrated it. And I think, he freely admits that. Like, he's not teaching that. Like he said, what Ken said is that the CALFIA's sole reason for having a meeting was not about
blasting him.
It wasn't about the patenting issues. We don't care about that.
I have questions about that.
Yeah, and I imagine you would, as a guy who does strength and conditioning, and you're in that world and you understand those case law decisions. That wasn't our issue. Our issues were specifically the language. And people were concerned about his previous testimony in civil court.
That's where the patent thing comes in for me.
And how he's going to square that when he asked to testify in civil court on a police issue. Mm-hmm. He gave a very, very good answer for that. And his answer was, when I testified in the civil court decision, I was talking specifically about laboratory exercises on a sterile mat between a black belt instructor and a novice student. I was not speaking about a dynamic situation between a police officer and a resisting subject where anything can happen, and the application of techniques is never going to be perfect. Mm-hmm. And I thought that's a sufficient answer.
That's a pretty good answer.
Yeah, that's a sufficient answer. And okay, check, right? Thank you for the answer, check. We want to know that you're going to do that. The second question was, you created, you're going to license this thing, right? It's yours, your baby, right? You're trademarking safe.
Trademarking and putting a patent on it.
You're patenting it. You're trademarking.
You own it, dude.
You own it. When it comes time, when a police officer uses it, and inevitably someone dies while the police officer is using it.
It's a matter of time, right?
That will happen.
Mm-hmm.
Are you going to defend your technique and the thing you created, or are you going to defend the police officer? And his answer was, I would defend the police officer. His answer is that there's a lot of different things that can occur and transpire in a dynamic event like that. And that the goal is not to be like, I gotcha, going after cops type of thing, which we felt to be sufficient. The last thing was, there was two more things. All of the issues related to the description and the discussion around prone restraint, and that safe wrap is the solution in comparison to other restraint methods.
Mm-hmm.
And he realized that, and we talked about how problematic that was, and which point he acknowledged and realized that, because in the demonstration of the technique, I went through the website, right? We all went through the website language. And in the demonstration of the technique, he did such a good job, not convincing, but like showing me why the
articulating
on its own merits, why it's a good, strong position, that the language that he has or had on the website was not relevant.
It's kind of unnecessary.
Yeah. And I was like, why? So why? And he goes, well, he goes, you actually make really good points. And he's like, and I realized that I don't have to criminalize prone restraint in order to market this.
Oh, that's a big statement right there.
Yes. And so he's like, so since then he's changed his website.
Interesting.
The website doesn't have, I used to have a graphic that's like prone restraint, red X's, safe wrap, green check marks. It's gone. Right?
Marketing.
Yeah. But it's like, it's on its own merits. And then the last part was the licensing. And because we had questions about it, and he makes excellent points. And his points are great. Because they run Gracie survival tactics, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's like, the problem with GST is that they certify instructors. The instructors go back to their agencies and they're expected to teach the material.
Right.
But agencies habitually are looking for ways to save money, save time. And so they'll gut instruction, right? Like, hey, you have 4 hours to deliver your PSP training.
16 hours worth of training gets done to taking down to 4 hours. Yeah.
Right. And so what does PSP stand for?
Perishable skills program. Yeah.
Perishable skills people. I don't know. I don't know why it's called PSP, but it's perishable skills stuff, right? In smaller departments specifically, and some bigger departments, that training gets gutted. So then you're cramming in you have 4 hours to train however many people. You're cramming in all this stuff, which you can't develop.
Well, let me just stop you there for a second. First off, trying to take 16 hours of what something is down to four hours, and I made that number up, 16 hours or whatever it is, but trying to give anybody
it's a 5-day instruction course. So yes,
it's 40 hours.
You're taking 40 hours of instruction. You're jamming in 4 hours.
Take 10% of it.
Right. So his point was, if we know that this stuff gets gutted on the back end, how can we find a way? They have
to protect themselves.
How can we find a way to not gut it? And the way is taser training doesn't get gutted, because if it does, then you're not in compliance with taser's licensing.
Okay.
So if you're not in compliance with taser's licensing, then you're liable. You're on the outs. Company can't defend you, right?
Yep.
So if we license it, and we require as part of the licensing that you have to watch training videos every quarter, and you have to do 2 hours on just that technique every year in order to maintain your license, departments will have to train.
I get it.
So do we.
Yeah. So because it's the same thing the bigger industries or bigger businesses are doing with things like the taser is a really great example. So that's how they minimize and maintain or minimize their liability as a company, and that's how you do it as an agency. And to my understanding, if you are not doing that, you are obviously liable, but you could get dropped by by the vendor very, very quickly, and they may even be able to come back at you and say you violated our contract and our agreement. And then that's another problem.
So it was interesting.
That's an interesting.
Yeah, it's very similar going back to what we're talking about with on the street, like a use of force. If you're outside policy, and you get civilly sued, well, you can be held. It's punitive. It's on you. If you're outside policy, you're not going to get covered.
Correct.
It's kind of the
It's
same.
the same thing.
Same thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So, man. So
we've got. I mean, I don't know why it's become such this weird little nuanced thing has become such a thing. Cause like people.
You mean with the safe rap?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's,
I mean, I may have some things to say there. First off, I think like whenever you're trying to patent anything, well, let's look at it the larger context. The way I don't know how it got out there, but it went like wildfire, right? And it blew up. And I think it blew up when you look at the larger population. So first off, when we're talking about like law enforcement, I think there's a very, very small portion of law enforcement that does any training outside of the training they're provided. Agreed or disagreed?
Agreed.
Okay. So, and that's just a reality, right?
Yeah.
So, and then within that, there's an even smaller population of people that probably do, that live in the jiu-jitsu world, the BJJ world.
Right.
So obviously that even takes down the number to a smaller amount of people. Then when you look at the BJJ world, which is blown up since the late 90s, right? It's again, blown up. Like, and it's popular household term now. And, from families to fighters, everybody's kind of doing it.
Yeah. Kids are doing it.
Correct.
It was when I started doing it, only crazy men were doing it.
Yeah, exactly. It was obscure.
Yeah.
Now it's like totally acceptable.
And I didn't even fit in. I started in college and I was like, I don't even fit in with this group.
Right,
These guys are crazy.
Yeah, they're savages, right?
They all look like Kenny.
Yeah. So the point, I guess the point I'm trying to make there is, okay, so now you have the jiu-jitsu world and how much of it has been influenced by Gracie's? Mm-hmm. All of it.
Yeah.
Probably fair to say.
Yeah.
And then of that, how much of that is the businesses are wrapped around the Gracie's, right? Because they are representing the Gracie school at some level, right? Yeah. They're a Gracie black belt from somewhere, or maybe that's on their school, but they're paying homage and they're to the lineage and all the things. So they're probably not going to make a big deal about this, right? They're going to try to, they're not going to go against the family, so to speak. And then there's another smaller section of people that don't like the Gracies for whatever reason, but still would respect what they brought to the thing, and they're pissed off about it. And within there, you've got businesses, right, mm-hmm. that are like, oh, this is going to take away from my business. Got some that just have a chip on their shoulder about whatever else. And so I think there was a very small, my point of saying this, I think there's a very small amount of people that were actually making a big deal about this thing. The more interesting thing to me was so going back to the patenting of it, that was the most misunderstood part. And the people that were most pissed off, or I think where the most of the stuff came from, was like, you can't patent this. You can't patent a move, right? You can't patent a technique, right? How can you do that? That's bad for jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
And it's bad for law enforcement, right? Like, that's not where we want to be going. And it kind of went there, and then it went away. And then there was talk about, again, you mentioned where is Henry going to stand on his testimony as it comes to that particular case that you just mentioned, and how would that affect law enforcement officer who got themselves into a legal case or a legal battle? That was a big one, right? And obviously a lot of talk about that.
Yeah.
I'd never heard that. So what you just explained to me is brand new. And I think a lot of the people I talked to hadn't heard that before either, right, or didn't want to hear it maybe. So that's part of it. And then obviously the business aspect of what Henry's trying to do and bringing it into California law enforcement. And it's a big market here, right? And that's probably people are threatened by that. And so that's kind of a thing. So I think when you kind of stack all those things on top of one another, that's where the hurt feelings come. And that's where the misunderstanding comes, because I don't know how many people talk directly to Henry like you guys did to maybe get those answers.
Yeah. I don't think anybody has.
I don't know.
I don't know.
He seems to be willing to have the discussion with anybody. And I think some of it is kind of what you said earlier about like Jay being a cop and then mm-hmm. creating this company to train cops. Henry's been doing it for 20 years. He's one of the only post-certified, I think maybe the only post-certified.
Yeah, I heard that.
Jiu-jitsu-based training groups out here. He's been doing it for a long time. And I think where his big disadvantage is, and we saw it with the safe rap, was he didn't come from law enforcement. So like, I would not have even called it the safe rap.
No.
Because somebody is most likely going to die in there. And so then you're going to go testify to him like, what'd you do? I used the safe rap.
But he died.
Oh, well, yeah. So there's those kind of things with the language. And that on top of and then the testimony, like when you testify, you put stuff on the record, that is going to come back.
100%.
And it's not even stuff you testify to. It's even what you do. You could, I mean, for us, you get in an OIS and then it's this big sensationalized OIS. And then they go and find some Facebook post where you're at a family function with a Punisher shirt. And they go, oh, look at you. That comes up. You're glorifying violence.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of the biggest problem with this for law enforcement.
You need to be more careful.
Yeah.
I think that's the practice of being careful with what you say and what you do, which most cops are really good at, is something that he just lacks, just because he's a private business. You know what I mean? So like, that's the thing. It's like
but he's willing to talk. And then going back a little bit more is some of the stuff that we do with CALFIA in terms of training. Like we'll do monthly membership Zoom meetings, and oftentimes we'll have somebody from the industry come and talk about something force related. Then we'll have everybody who's on there, we'll have a roundtable discussion about stuff going on in their area, what they're seeing. Usually great discussions on that. And then we record it and put it up on on a site for the members. Yeah, he wanted to come on and he wants to take questions from the membership. So he's going to do that at our next one, November 6th.
Oh, interesting. So he's putting himself out there.
So that's what I was going to say is this. Got to give credit where credit's due. One of the things about CALFIA that we want to be known for is being fair. Okay.
Open discussion.
Being fair. We want to, the whole mission of the association is to raise the standards, right? To raise the standards from this like sort of labor-like mentality of law enforcement to a more academic level, right? We call it a profession, but there are people within our profession that don't act like professionals, right? We, in doing that, we have to act like a university does with regard to information, which means oftentimes inviting people to be a part of the conversation that are our intellectual opposite, right? Or that take a viewpoint or a stance that's counter to ours, right? And just hearing what they have to say, seeing it for our own eyes, rather than just being biased and going, oh, we don't like that. I watched the YouTube video. I don't like that. We're not dealing with that guy. What I love about what Henner did is that he believes so strongly that the control technique itself is so good that he's willing to withstand any criticism. He wants to hear all of the criticism. So that's why he took our meeting. He's like, I want to hear it.
Fair enough.
Even after being in that Shark Tank, so to speak, right? With guys that know what they're talking about, have the experience to talk about it. He took it a step further and was like, I want to hear more criticism. I want to hear criticism from your membership. Can I get in front of your membership to hear all of their questions and all of their criticism? So we're not advising him as a association. We can't legally advise him.
But you're obliging him.
But we are allowing him a space to hear criticism from experts.
That's healthy.
From people from all corners of California with all different backgrounds. And some of our members are doctors, lawyers, people who work in the space of police defense and civil court that have a different viewpoint, that will have different questions than I might have. Ken and I might be more concerned about the control aspects of, well, this grip is better than that grip. But a person like Dr. Peters from the, Institute of the Prevention of In-Custody Death might have questions related to gas exchange in the lungs from that position, right? And so it's like just getting, and it's all about people just being better, and for the end user and the end practitioner, which is our concern is what information is the young police officer armed with at 2:00 in the morning, in the middle of the night, when they're dealing with their fight for their death.
When my mom calls 911.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what I'm talking about.
And going back to talking about wanting to be fair. We don't only want to be fair, we have to be fair, because like you talked about earlier about some of the businesses, like it's not just the practical aspect of force, it's the legal aspect. And we have different guys who, like, we're trying to set a standard and they're teaching the same thing, but they're teaching it different ways. And some guys have their own classes. So the
There have to be some congruency here.
Yeah. So, and in us being fair and giving that platform for people, like you said, might be our intellectual opposite, or our members might be mad at. If they're in the force world, if we're a place where they know that, hey, these guys are fair, I can say my piece. That's what we want. Because even in our conferences, we've been bringing our intellectual opposites in so that memberships can hear from somebody that might charge them or might do their OIS investigation review of internally and be like, no, that's not good. So we want to be a place where we create a standard for the use of force ideas, concepts, techniques. And we say, these are good. These are good options. We have all these options. And then when a bad one comes up, we be like, no, that's not going to fly.
So I love that. So it's kind of the way I look at that with problem solving and being process focused. And that's what I hear you guys doing. Like, let's go through a process of understanding what this is.
Yeah.
What are some of the challenges we might have with it? Let's vet it a little bit. Let's debate it a little bit. Let's confront it. I don't mean that like in a negative way. Like, let's just head it head on and let's talk to the source, right? And then let's give him an opportunity, as long as he hasn't taken that opportunity away from himself in some way in that initial meeting or whatever, and how that happened. But when and then discount it or whatever. So what you just said right there about like these different solutions, I think that's the thing that an organization like CALFIA is, or has the opportunity to talk about and articulate. And that is, I think there's a lot of things, whether we're talking use of force, obviously is very broad, right? I mean, it's from hands-on to tools and all the things that comes in between. Obviously, there's language involved there too. And so the way I see this is what I've learned over my time. So whether we're looking at Henner and Jay and the things that they're doing, is there is always more than one way to solve a problem.
Yes,
right?
100%.
Always. And I think there are wrong ways to try and do that. But I think there's probably more right ways than wrong ways. But when you see a wrong way, it has to be confronted in that way, right? And if it could be a right way, well, then let's go and make sure we tease this thing out, or as people like to say, pressure test it.
Yes.
Or whatever, knowing that there will never be a perfect solution to any of it. And I think that's the fascinating part about this, but it also really bothers me when people either from the inside or the outside are so quick to say like, well, that's bullshit, it'll never work.
Right.
Because, okay, well then show me a better fucking way.
Yeah.
Like show me or do something remarkable and bring it to the table for the rest of us, instead of sitting back and just saying everything doesn't work or that it's shitty or whatever.
Just being a bad idea.
Just being a bad idea. Exactly. So there's idea fairies, good idea fairies, and there's bad idea fairies. And that's important to take note of. But I think, again, coming from the CALFIA's perspective is as an officer who's busy doing shit all the time, right? And then maybe as a new officer, like I need to go somewhere to understand. Like,
unless you're an SRO.
Right. Well, that's something I didn't say at the beginning. I was like, I bet that job probably affords you like a schedule that allows you to do the things that you're doing with CALFIA in some way too.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. Like, not that, you couldn't do something else, but like for as much involvement as you have, and given kind of what that job description and how it works is, it probably gives you the opportunity to stay heavily involved and keep your finger on the pulse and be a contributor at CALFIA versus, if you're, I don't know, man, I don't know how you guys all do it with all the different adjunct duties that you have and all that stuff. But coming back, like I need a resource. I need somebody to go to where I can trust them to, like we've just spent a long time talking about all this, but I need it delivered to me in a way that I can understand it.
Cut through the noise. Yeah.
Cut through the noise. And yes, cut through the noise, but also make sure when I hang up the phone, I am clear, or hang up the internet, whatever I'm doing, wherever I'm consuming this information or leave this meeting, that I'm clear on what the thing is.
Yeah.
And so that takes a lot of skill.
Yeah.
And a lot
it's like, while you're talking, I'm thinking about the positional asphyxia bill. It's like positional asphyxia bill codifies positional asphyxia, which is still medically debated, right? We go down, we do the micro course with Post. We listen to what they're saying. We read the stuff. We were going through, and we come to the idea that what's the word?
Realization.
Realization that it's talking about body weight pressure unreasonably applied or techniques unreasonably applied. Well, we're not in the business of unreasonably applying anything.
Well, yeah. What does that mean?
So monitor, right? Monitor for breathing. But as far as unreasonable application of force, that's not what we're in the business for. So unless you're doing something that's crazy and out of, you shouldn't be worried about this bill. There's some things that you should be, you should consider, important. Right? Mm-hmm. But yes, that's really the where the rubber meets the road with our association is taking these things that come out and going, we looked at it, we read it, we talked to this expert, we had a meeting with this lawyer. This is our take on it. Do these things,
Yeah. So what you're doing is you're arming the officer or whoever your consumer of your information is with information that can now allow them to walk away feeling confident about what they know or what they don't know. So you have a lot of responsibility, man. Like there's a huge responsibility in doing what you guys are doing. In that, as you're building membership, and we'll talk about that, as you're building membership and you're building recognition and you're building an audience for this stuff, that as people are getting it, you are able to deliver this messaging to a vast array of people or individuals, let's just call it that, with different learning styles. When you talk about adult human learning and how they consume information and where they're getting it from, all the way. So for me, it's like, how do you get it to them? There's the how do you get it there, and then what are they getting, and then also what can they do to advocate for themselves or for their department? Because if they're the only one, you go back to that person that's getting the information and it's their responsibility to then put it down. Like, how do I recognize this information is important as the 4-year-old cop, right? And I want my leadership to listen to me, or like, how do I advocate for that in my own department? I think like getting the message out that's going to be a challenge, right? And so where does that all fit into this? I'm just kind of thinking out loud here
it's a good thought. I think that we struggle as a profession culturally with that idea.
This is my point.
The Japanese have this term called Kaizen, which is the philosophy of renewal. Mm-hmm. And so I read in some industrial tech magazine when I was on an airplane one day, Ford Motor Company, during the 90s, travels to Japan to meet with Toyota. Mm-hmm. And they're like, how are you able to produce so many cars so quickly without assembly line stoppages? We have a problem where we produce the car, it gets to the assembly line, at the end of the assembly line, and then we realize we have a mistake with the car. And what they found was, because the Japanese the philosophy, they institute this concept of Kaizen into all of their staff. The understanding is that every member of the organization, whether you're the janitor or the CEO, has the autonomy and the authority to stop the assembly line right now and fix the problem without going to a supervisor and asking permission to do it. That goes against the American model completely.
100%.
The American model is shut up.
Do your job.
Do your job. Who do you think you are?
Punch in, punch out.
You don't know more than I do. I've been working at this company for longer than you have. You don't know shit, excuse my language. Mm-hmm. Get back in line. Mm-hmm. So you got a guy on the assembly line, for your baby cop, for the analogy, who's doing his little thing. All of a sudden, problem comes by him and he's like, that's a problem. Last time I spoke up, I got squashed, so I'm just going to keep my mouth shut. And now other guys are better about keeping their mouth shut than others. I'm not good at keeping my mouth shut. But you're going to suffer the consequences for speaking up. We struggle. Law enforcement really struggles with that.
It's broken.
It also struggles at the managerial level with that. Mm-hmm. I have this new... I have a lot of friends that are managers. Some of them are going to watch this podcast, and I will acknowledge I've never been an administrator. I'm not a sergeant. I'm a deputy. I'm not a manager. I've not had to deal with the things that they deal with. So there is a piece of this that is accessibility bias, in the sense that I don't have access to the information that they have, so I don't know
I understand
what their job is like. But my new bit is law enforcement leaders don't lead, they follow, right? We do, as a culture and as an industry, we do what the other agency is doing. Look at how long it took law enforcement to jump on social media and start doing Facebook posts and Instagram posts and YouTube videos. Facebook originated when I was in college. It wasn't until 10, 15 years, almost 20 years later that agencies started doing Facebook pages and posting about community stuff, right? It took them that long. And it wasn't until all of the other agencies, some big agency did it, and then other people followed that they do it, right? So like, we're just not good at being creative and original with ideas. But it's because culturally, American culture, workforce culture is very much like, you don't know enough, shut up. So to the 4-year baby cop, going back to your thing, see what I just did? I weaved. Going back to the 4-year baby cop thing, the advice to him, do the right thing, right? If you believe in something and it's important to you and you think you're on the right path, or you know you're on the right path because you're listening to us or whatever it may be because the information you got, do the right thing, but you got to wear the consequences.
Yeah, so that means make sure you're put together in your presentation and be aware of how that could go. Don't have any unreasonable expectations.
It might hurt you.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, you might not get promoted as a result of it.
So I think this brings up another point, and that is, what's really uncommon is to see current law enforcement officers, right? That like you two, that are actually on podcasts advocating for these types of things. Right? Where most of the time it's somebody retired.
Yes.
And any law enforcement officer current law enforcement officer that I've had has had to go through a lot of stuff to even be here. And it's the ones that have been on have had very supportive leadership in a lot of different ways. And these were leaders in their own minds that were or in their own right that were on the show. But going back to like the being out there and asking the questions or presenting the problem or whatever, it's basically told this, you just proved the point. Like, they're not out there. Why? Because they're told, you fucking do your job, shut your mouth. Who are you to be talking about this stuff? And if you make us look bad, you're going to get squashed, kind of thing. So as a result, no, you may not do that. You may not talk about whatever the issue is.
And it's even more than that, than just internally the organization. We're talking about, for me to say this a bunch, but we also have a diminished First Amendment right while we're a cop, the entire time we're a cop. So you internally at your department, that can hurt you for what you say, or this podcast, or maybe I say something stupid and a couple years from now I'm an OIS, something I say in here
comes
not
back.
even stupid. It's just, it can come back. It's like, what holds up to scrutiny? Nothing. So you take something take it totally out of context and then use it against me later. I think that's a big fear that being law enforcement have, and why we don't push narratives and why we don't talk. I have that fear. I'm not very comfortable doing podcasts. I don't like doing stuff. And that's a reason. Cause it's like, well, I could say something. I have a tendency to rant and go off and say crazy stuff. So, or that I know could potentially be used against me later on, just completely out of context.
Right.
And I think that is a big part of why we don't push narratives and get out there more.
Yeah. It's historically, law enforcement has a very, it's kind of perverted too. Like, we have a history of being quiet, doing our work, but not going out there and pushing narratives about the work that we're doing. The perversion is that that's somehow being humble, but it's not. That's
you're
not
supposed to be the gray man, and
that's not necessarily what humility means. Just because you speak up doesn't mean that you're not a humble person, right? Or that you're not being having humility about the work that you're doing. The reality is that no one's going to pay attention to you or your agency if you don't talk about what you're doing. That's what got us here.
Mm-hmm.
What got us here is that we didn't do good press releases. We didn't do town hall meetings with the public. We didn't have a conversation with the driver of the car that's not happy about how the car stop went after the car stop was done and took place and all the business was done. We didn't have a conversation with the neighbor who's standing in their front yard asking what happened after the police showed up and the entire police force descended upon their neighborhood at 2:00 in the morning, served not a search warrant too, but let's say late at night, right? late at night, served a search warrant in their neighborhood, or early in the morning, served a search warrant in their neighborhood with a SWAT team in an armored truck, and used flashbangs and gas, and then didn't explain why they were there and what happened. Or there was some sort of crazy use of force that happened, and they didn't explain to the guy who was the subject of that use of force what happened and how we got from A to Z. When I was brand new, I was taught that that's not our job. We're not supposed to do that, right? And like, what? Like, why are you sitting here explaining yourself? Get back in the car. Let's go. And so then you learn, right? Again, going back to like the American workforce model, right? It's like, well, you learn like, oh, this is what's not desired. Like, in order for me to be successful and thought of as like a good person in this organization, I'm supposed to just like shut up, right? And then what happens? 2013, Mike Brown happens, and they waited 6 days, 7 days to do a press release. Why? Why? Because that was what the standard was. The standard was, we've always just done what we do, and then we just
walk away.
We walk away, or we write a one-page press release on a Word document and send it to the news media and expect them to be able to put the pieces together. That's not sufficient.
Oh, and they will. They'll finish the story.
Yeah, especially not in an age when information, how people consume information, has changed.
Yeah.
And then going all the way back to the use of force stuff, I mean, that's where we're losing.
Yeah.
We're lost on the force. We didn't have any advocacy groups talking about any of these little force things that we've lost over the years. Our authorities to use force and techniques and stuff that's like the carotid, that's incredibly effective and painless, and losing all of that. Now we have this new use of force standard that I would argue, and we've talked about this, that the citizens lost. I mean, we've lost, but because of that, the citizen themselves have lost. It's changed the way that we do things. Like this, you said the way we've done things, like that's a big thing in law enforcement. Well, it's the way we've always done it. It's the way we've always done it. And then when now this big thing happens, like you can't do it that way anymore. That's a hard bridge for some people to cross over when they see like the way they've been doing it for 20 plus years. Like you can't do that anymore. And then, it's law enforcement, it's for the public themselves, because now, since this bill has got passed, the risk profile for the citizen has greatly increased. It's actually, there's an argument to be made. It's made cops safer in the way that they approach calls, because it's no more one riot, one deputy, run in now like a chicken with your head cut off. It's wait, all available options. So the risk to the public has greatly increased.
Yes.
The safety for the officers increased because we're not doing that. And the safety for the suspect has increased. But the citizen, no, it hasn't. It's gone. It's been detrimental.
Think about it. Go back to the you take a domestic violence scenario, go back 10 years, and you got crazy man in the house with his wife. It's just them in the house. It's a house that we've been to multiple times for domestic violence calls. He's been arrested before. Back in the day, she's in the house. He's barricaded. He won't come out. She's in the house. She's a hostage. We're probably going in there. We're probably going to make entry into the house to get her out, right? If we can't get her out. Under the new law, we're not doing that. We don't have any affirmative duty to do that. We don't have an actual legal affirmative duty to protect her from her husband in that scenario. It's a relationship that she chose to be in. There's no legal reason for us to go into the house to get her out, right? There was in the way that the law is written, if he 10 years ago, if he would have poked him, let's say he's threatening her or whatever it is, right?
Yep.
And he shows himself in a window, sniper's probably going to take that shot and we're going to get her out. She's going to be safe, right? Under current law, the sniper now might have to clear the bar of, am I going to get prosecuted for this, right? So is the sniper going to take a shot on a guy that's not showing an immediate threat of serious bodily injury or death to the woman. He showed himself in a window, right? So it has caused, and that's just an extreme example, but it has caused, and it's what they wanted, right? Like the intent of the legislation, first five paragraphs, is that police only use deadly force when necessary, right? In defense of others. Not fear of future harm, no matter how great the circumstance or no matter how great the fear is, but one that must be instantly confronted, right? Well, that's good for the suspect. And
it's good for the suspect.
It's good for us too, if you change your mindset, right?
Okay.
If you change your mindset and you go, well, I don't want to take on any unnecessary risk that might put me in prison. Then you can, we were joking about this on the way down.
You can always step back to that and go.
Kenny and I can be standing on the street, drinking a cup of coffee, and a guy can show up on the street with a gun in his hand and go, hey, cops, I'm going to kill Scott right now. And we can go behind our cars and we can sit and watch this guy shoot and kill you and do nothing. And we're legally fine. But the moment we do something, the moment we step into this and we try to,
everything has to be justified.
Everything has to be all the T's crossed, all the I's dotted or whatever. The only situation is a special relationship situations. So, if you've created a special relationship, then you find yourself in that situation.
So I think that just listening to you guys walk through those things for the last few minutes makes my head hurt. It makes my head hurt, and it makes the hair stand up on the back of my neck. It makes my blood boil. There's so many things there, because if you're trying to be supportive of law enforcement and you know the things that they're up against, like you guys have articulated really well today, how do you help them, from the outside? So like if again, just a concerned citizen, how do we, again, going back to what you guys are doing, where
you take matters into your own hands.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's that's interesting you say that, because I think that's largely how I fell into this. So a little bit of the story is, we talked about COVID offline or whatever, and that shit happened. And then, what happened with Floyd happened, and San Jose had its own issues. The city hall is about 1.5 miles down the street, same street you guys just parked on, right? Law enforcement here handled that pretty decisively. When dumpsters and cars started getting lit on fire, didn't last very long. People got dispersed. Well, they started moving down this way. I lived 2 blocks up the street, saw it all happening on the news, going, oh, those shit bags are going to be in front of my business in a minute. I better go down there and protect my business. Again, we had already been shut down because of COVID and whatever else. So I sat in the window with a couple firearms and watched the TV and watched the people go by outside and made eye contact. It was just trying to be a deterrent of what was going on. Mm-hmm. And it was the moment, it was at that time when people were talking about, look, nobody's coming, man.
Yeah.
Which I realized, so my point being here is, I think to your point is be a prepared citizen, and understand that these same laws are going to wind up working into the private citizen side of things.
Well, so I'm so glad you asked that, because I have this saying that it's not my saying. It's Sir Robert Peel's saying, which was the originator of policing in Great Britain, right? In the UK.
Yep.
And his saying is that the police are the public and the public are the police. The only thing that differentiates the two is that the police are paid to give full-time attention to that which every man should give full-time attention to. So what does that mean? It's like being, and I'm saying this as an analogy. I'm not saying that members of the public that we deal with are like garbage, but I'll use a garbage man analogy, right? If garbage service is a thing that is a modern construct, and it's a great modern construct.
It's absolutely necessary.
Yeah. Garbage men go around, they pick up garbage. City workers go around, they pick up garbage flying around in the streets, in the gutters and things like that. But what if they didn't?
World's a different place.
Okay. Does that mean that just because those services exist, that
we shouldn't
that it absolves you from picking up the McDonald's trash bag that's in your driveway? No. We have gotten to this place in American society where people believe that it's someone else's job.
problem. Yeah.
And I think, and that's another part of us losing these use of force, call them battles, like legislative battles, and not pushing narratives is these things like, come parent my kid for me. My kid stole from a store and I want you to come yell at him. And then you end up getting use of force to the kid and he dies. 5150 stuff, debatable but relying on police to do these things. And then we do, and a use of force happens and becomes controversial.
Yeah.
And nobody wins. Nobody wins at all because people don't take personal responsibility on the things that they should handle.
I think people have we've gotten to a point in society where everything is so easy. This is the easiest time to live in the history of the mankind. Like, you don't have to hunt for your food. You can have your food delivered to you. I used to use this analogy, like you can go down to the grocery store, get your meat, boneless, skinless, wrapped in plastic. Now it's even worse. You don't even have to butcher. You don't even have to cook your meat. You can just have it delivered to your house fully cooked.
Yep.
Right? Okay. Well, what about dealing with problems? What about dealing with evil? What about dealing with threats? Right? There's a lot of people. There's a huge population out there that would argue that you coming down to your business and standing in your window with a firearm was recklessly.
Oh, I know. I've already heard all about it.
Right. And they would say, how dare you?
Right.
Violence is never the answer. Blah, 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 blah. Okay. If violence is never the answer, then what happened with Uvalde?
Yep.
Why did people become so highly critical? Like, people criticize the police for being too violent, and then they criticize the police for not being violent enough, right? Like, violence is sometimes the answer. Bottom line,
it is the answer to violence.
It's 50. Well, it's 50%. There's only two solutions to a conflict.
Yeah,
talking it out or violence.
That's a mutual agreement. Like, and if that agreement to talk it out isn't going to happen, then and it resorts to that, then violence negates violence at the end of the day.
Yeah, exactly. For violence, right? If we're talking about criminality and violence and things like that. And so I'm very much of the opinion that parents, private citizens, et cetera, you should know the law just as well as a police officer does. You don't lose the right to defend yourself. You don't lose the right to protect your property. Those are rights that are enshrined. But you should know, right? Like, what the limitation of those laws is. Very similar to police officers. Slightly different because a police officer, when you put the uniform on and you go to work, you're now an agent of the U.S. government, and so you have more limitation on your authority.
We covered that a little bit going back to First Amendment rights.
Yeah. So going back to the Constitution.
And the big thing for force, obviously, is the Fourth Amendment. The big thing with force is the Fourth Amendment rights. Mm-hmm. We're unique, and we're the only profession that I can think of that can take somebody's freedom away, that can use deadly force on them. American citizens. We're the only ones that get to do that. That's a pretty lofty responsibility.
It's huge.
And I think a lot of cops don't realize.
Oh my God, we're going to get into this now?
Yeah, no.
We're going to get this is a great conversation.
But I think that, again, this comes back to, what you guys are doing with CALFIA and helping people to understand this better. Those that want to understand, I guess, too, because maybe some don't.
Yeah, some don't.
I do fear that there is some willful ignorance in law enforcement, especially in California law enforcement, to the changes that are occurring and wanting to do things that, or keep doing business as usual when statute or even staffing does not comport with what you want to do. It just doesn't. And I think there's some willful ignorance behind that.
I think that I think that there are police officers that these type of conversations are just too much for. Mm-hmm. I think that there's probably some of your viewers that are going to watch 15, 20 minutes of this and be like, my brain hurts.
Yep.
I'm done. I'm turning this off.
I know that too. I get that. I'm incapable of it. Kenny's incapable of it.
I'm sitting over here looking at your whiskey and I was like, oh, what whiskey's open? But I'm like, I don't like when him and I get in the room together, I can't, like, we're incapable of just sitting and just being like, so what whiskey are you drinking? Or, football or whatever it is. It's always about some of these like crazy ideas, right? Like deep understanding of like what it is that we do. But I also didn't have that understanding when I was a younger police officer.
Yeah, I get that too. Yeah, this comes with experience and time. And
I think that's also something that people forget when they're looking at police.
I agree.
They're looking at police interaction with the public and they see something that didn't go right. Let's say the Tyreek Hill incident, right? And they go, this is, this is cops, blah, blah, blah. And then they see something that did go right. And they go, oh, how come this incident didn't get handled like that incident? And it's like, well, who's that guy? What's he done? How did his live experience translate to him being able to handle that situation
differently? Yeah.
Because if you compare me, 41, to me, 24-year-old police officer, different outcomes.
Not even
Not even close, right? Different outcomes. You don't get the mature, well-spoken, thought out, mindful police officer right out of the academy. It takes time and experience to develop that guy. And I think far too often we are really hard on. I mean, let's also confront this idea that like, who are we? Who are we made of? I was listening to Ice Cube talk to Tucker Carlson.
Okay. Yeah. I missed that one.
It's good. And he said, about police. He's like, well, how do you feel about the police? And he's like, I feel the same. And he's like, the police are basically an organization that exists. And they have a philosophy that they need to make it home at night. And he's like, and sometimes I think that philosophy is detrimental to the people that they serve, but it's also a philosophy that I understand if I was a police officer, right? Okay, well, who are we made out of? We're made out of people who were regular people,
humans,
who became police officers. The idea that you, citizen, who is watching this and going, I would never do those things. Incorrect. If you had gone through the training that we had gone through and saw the things that we had experienced and ended up in the same situations, you too, as a human, would probably do what we're doing.
This is evolution anyways. I mean, when you look at history, I mean, humans are still doing the same shit they were doing 2,000 years ago.
Yeah.
They are. It's just things are a little bit more sophisticated now.
It's like saying like, oh my God, that police officer, I can't believe, I don't know, say like not Fletcher, but like Walter Scott, the one where he shoots the guy in the back as he's running across the park. And it's like, I can't even imagine he did that. It's like saying you're not capable of murder. Every human is capable of murder under certain circumstances, right? You just haven't experienced those circumstances yet. But if you were to experience those circumstances, you too could commit murder. All humans are capable of committing murder. Just like any human who's gone through the police training and gone through these circumstances and ends up in the correct pressure could kick out an unsavory result, right? But our goal is to get people especially with the lack of training, right? That we have, what do we say? Less training than a T-ball team is what
yikes,
police officers get.
Well, let's talk about that kind of just with where's the organization now in terms of membership? We've talked about kind of what you've been doing. Initially we talked about how you got here and what you guys have been doing, but where's this going? Like, you talked about the mission, but where's this going? Give me some direct.
Are you familiar with Wall Street Bets? What do they say?
Yeah.
To the moon. That's where we're going.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah. That's where we're going.
Yeah. So talk about that. Like, what does that look like for you? What does to the moon look like?
Right now, our membership is probably close to 450, 450, 430, 450. We are branching outside of California. We want to, a lot of our stuff now is more centered around legal aspects, right? The changes in law.
This makes sense.
And then a lot more on the grappling side, the hands-on side.
Makes sense.
We want to take the whole force umbrella. We want to get more or less lethal tools in. We want to get firearms guys in. We want to get the canine guys in. We want to grow that force umbrella.
SWAT guys.
SWAT guys, yep. Obviously, we want to increase the membership to do that. We want to. We wanted to get post-certified because we know that some department that's a hindrance to get guys to go.
That's the gateway.
Yeah, it's a post class.
Or the
solo
key,
go
I mean,
there.
I guess the key.
Yeah. So we've gotten that.
Let's do
We
with
want to do
money.
more advocacy stuff. We have a lot of stuff we want to do. I will say I'm not trying to be a downer on it or a martyr about it, but like this thing is a juggernaut. Like he was talking before about the other associations that exist. Like I think even when I first heard about it, like this could be huge. It's a national organization like NTOA, but it is tough. It could be bigger than it is now, but you got the board member. We're all cops that work more than full-time jobs. My last paycheck was 173 hours for 2 weeks. And then trying to do this on top of it. So we've had to stymie some of the growth.
Humble brag.
Yeah, humble brag. We had to stymie some of the growth that we could be now. But that's what we look to our members. It's very much a membership-oriented organization. We have a lot of members that give us material. So like we do a monthly newsletter, get stuff from other industry experts and leaders who send it to us because we're like a clearinghouse for all this information.
Yeah.
And we're trying to put it out to people as best ways we can. Emails, videos, conferences.
That's a lot.
And we want to keep that trajectory.
Yeah, my thing is we had some board transitional periods. Our president stepped down because he had things that he needed to do with he had double knee surgery, which is a big one.
HIPAA.
And sorry, Tracy.
Get better soon, man.
Yeah. So I ended up becoming the VP, and then Brandon Sontag out of Santa Ana Police Department became our president. My goal as the vice president is to grow our membership from where we're at right now, which is just under 500 members. And I think we're at like 70 plus agencies in California, in the nation, or I should say in the world, because we have Canada.
That's true.
Our Canadian brothers, eh? I want to quadruple my goal is short-term goal is to quadruple our membership in the next 2 years, to go from 500 members to 2,000 members in the next 2 years. It's not a big ask. I think some things that don't work in our favor is that we don't have our association's not dealing with the sexy work.
Right.
Like we don't have a conference in Las Vegas. We might for our 10-year, but we don't have a conference in Reno. Our conference is not a conference that you come to. And this is kind of the problem with law enforcement a bit. Like some of these conferences are kind of like, the scam is like, go ahead and say it. I know you want to.
That's a
You
frat
say it
party.
first.
It's a frat party. Dude.
A lot of drinking, right? A lot of hanging out.
I get it. Like,
Yeah.
look, I mean, I get it. We're all big boys and adults,
Sure.
and sometimes that stuff's good as long as it's being productive. But
We want
yes.
we don't want to stop that, do that. But when it's work time, when it's classroom time, our classroom instruction during conference is heavy material.
Look, I think if you're being a professional out there, you can balance the two.
Mm-hmm.
Some people do a better job than others,
Yeah.
but like a certain amount of this has to be academic.
Yeah, it is.
You know?
And so like he kind of alluded to it, but like our last year's conference we had, which was actually this year, it was in August. We kicked it off with a panel on use of force reform, and we invited purposefully Sheriff Chad Bianco. Thank you for coming, sir. Mike Giannacco of the OIR group, which if you're a police officer, you're aware who they are and what their work is, which is police accountability,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like they're the guys who get called in when a city's messing up, or not messing up, but struggling with some stuff.
Okay.
And they'll do like reports on things that many police officers don't like, right? We had a DDA from San Bernardino, Deputy District Attorney from San Bernardino, who came in. And then we had a professor from University of Southern California who deals with race issues, right?
Okay.
Dr. Jody Armour. And we purposefully, when I introduced these people on stage, when I introduced this panel, purposefully, I'm like, BLM advocate, wrote a book on racist issues. I want the audience to be like, what?
Mm-hmm.
Why'd you invite the enemy to our panel, this is supposed to be a safe place for cops to wear our super tight t-shirts. You know what I mean? Like,
Mediums?
Like, yeah, I came here with my medium t-shirt on and I'm an extra large. How dare you invite this guy? So as I'm like wearing mine too.
Yeah.
We don't want comfort.
Mm.
That's not where growth happens. We want a certain level of discomfort. And we want a certain level of we want you to be stretching your mind, right? We've sought purposefully to do that at every conference. I've been to CNOA. I've been to the PORAC conference. Actually, I haven't been to a lot of conferences. He has, but I've not seen that from other organizations. I've seen very much of like, who do the cops, who's going to get the cops excited?
It's very much probably a rinse and repeat.
Who do they want to hear from? They want to hear from, I don't know, flavor of the week. He's going to be our keynote speaker, right? And everybody's like, yeah, we get to hear, but that's siloed, right? Like you're in your own echo chamber, you know? So
I think there's a time and place for both, probably.
100%
because
true.
Yeah,
100% true.
Yeah, I think you can balance it.
Well, you don't want to go too heavy on the other stuff, right?
No,
yeah.
Again, but the trick probably is just finding the balance.
Yeah.
And as you're building your organization, you're probably going to find a little bit more of that. And you know, I think it's easy. It's maybe easier to take those risks up front, you know, and just do what you say, you know, like, and that's what we're doing. We're creating an uncomfortable environment, and that'll give you a true membership. So when you do reach the 2,000 and when you quadruple your number, you got 2,000 true members that are there that want to be there, that want to contribute, and want to give and take from it, versus 10,000 where you only got 1,000 of them that are really in it.
Yeah.
Going back to the whole social media thing, like you can do a lot of damage, and I mean that in the best kind of way, with 2,000 members, right? In terms of spreading the message and getting the news.
Have you had Scott Savage on yet?
No.
Oh my God. He's from your neck of the woods. From Santa Clara.
I don't know.
Yeah. No. I want 2,000 Scott Savages as members, which is, a tall order, but that's the goal.
Yeah. He was one of the guys that we referenced earlier that was at kind of ahead of it where this law was going. He's got his training group, the Savage Training Group, and they've been with us for a long time now. And he'll present at our conferences, and he's done some of those monthly membership meetings, and gives really good content. He's got a awesome training cadre of kind of these current experts in different fields, especially force. And they're killing it with training up and down the state.
I'll have to check it out. I think, when you talk about like just sort of force multiplying there and getting it out there, let's talk about how to do that. Like obviously there's the website, which we can talk about, but like, where do people go to get more information, either like in the interwebs, but also like locally? You mentioned there's like over 70 agencies now. So this is, how many agencies in California?
580-ish, I think.
Wow. So that's huge. I had no idea there were that many. So, and how many of those 70 are in California?
Majority 90% of them.
Oh, okay, good. All right.
And 95%.
Let's call it 65 or something of them are California agencies. I mean, I would imagine like regionally, obviously, since it says California in the name, that's the thing. Like, where do people go if they're out there to get more information? I mean, do you have any like champions outside of the guys that are on the board that are in these agencies that are really doing good work? Like, what's the model there?
So I think we're very much grassroots.
Okay.
The model has been, because we don't have a podcast, and growing an Instagram channel, growing in like an Instagram following on social media since the algorithm changed is like really difficult. There's not really a space like for what we're pushing to go viral, right? Like no matter how many times you hashtag academic standards.
It's like you said, you're not doing the sexy work. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. We're not putting on the coolest, newest tactical pants and like, stuff. So that's difficult, but it's been very much grassroots. We meet somebody who is a force nerd champion, and then they go tell. Then once they know us, they go tell some. I mean, that's how we end up here, right?
Yep, exactly.
Jay, we've done work with Jay. Jay's presented as a regional trainer. He's for 3 or 4 times in California. He came out. He presented at CALFIA in Napa in 2023. Did a 4-hour presentation on training. And then anytime he gets a chance to talk to somebody, he's talking to them about what we're doing, right? So again, it's just that network. There's really no good California network for training.
Isn't that interesting?
It is interesting. Like there's
580 agencies.
Yeah,
and nobody, and we're not working together.
Yeah, everything's very siloed. It's really weird. Like when we went to go try to advertise the conference 3 years ago, like there's no like statewide networking thing that you can send a training flyer to or put a video on.
And even I would say there's little ones like kind of for State Sheriff's Association.
Right.
We've done that, but it's every one of these avenues to deliver it is just to a very specific group of people. So you would really have to find all of those channels and push that.
It's almost like,
but it's
someone should create like law enforcement social media. Like that's it. Like it's just a platform. You have to be a member and like you get on it. And then all of a sudden, am I giving away proprietary information right now? So, but like something like LinkedIn or whatever it is, where you can just like you're networked with these people and you post something and it automatically goes out to everybody so they can see it. But it just doesn't exist.
Well, I think you guys are on the right track. I mean, you guys could be that.
Yeah. Well, my goal is to do as many podcasts over the next 2 years as possible to try to get the message out,
I think, obviously you guys are doing a great job and have done a great job today, delivering the message. We went down quite a few rabbit holes, and I think what's important about the rabbit holes is this is the conversation for me, but selfishly, that I think I want to hear. Like, and again, some of it's not very sexy. We're talking about, legal shit, right? AB 3 whatever. Like there's so many things to be talked about here, but how important that is and how that trickles down and how it impacts police culture and how it impacts the culture between police and citizens. And there's such a, we were talking about, you kind of brought up the, me standing in my business with a firearm and how reckless and irresponsible that is. Yeah, you can say that standing where you're standing.
I'm not saying
no.
Yeah.
The person, the camp out there, the population of people that would say that. Like, but you have no fucking skin in the game. So, like it's easy for you to say kind of thing.
Well, those type of people would never fight for anything.
So that's a whole other podcast. But my point of that being is there's such a misunderstanding. There's just such a disconnect. And it's even a disconnect from what you guys just told me from one agency to the next in our own state. We're not even talking about multiple states.
Yeah.
And a lot of it, I think, for me, when I'm listening to other cops talk, whether it's online or offline kind of thing, there's a lot of frustration about that, but there's nobody really taking the lead in bringing it together. Training is a thing now. Training is like, do we get enough? Do we not get enough? Or in the training that we're getting, are we getting the right kind of training? And it seems to be so far behind.
And are we learning?
Yeah, that's the thing.
So are we learning?
So the 4 hours that I've gotten, like, what did I get out of that? Like, and who got it, by the way? Who actually got the training? I think we may have been talking about that before. We were talking about the school resource officer stuff. Like, who's getting the training?
Yeah.
Right? Is it the people that are on the front line that are faced with this stuff every day? Or is it a select group of people, as you were mentioning, Kenny, just with regard to, who actually is getting the information, then who gets the training, how is the resources being allocated?
And then once they get it, like the model that the departments typically have is like, we're going to send this person to the training.
And then they're going to come back.
And they're going to come back and they're going to bring it back.
Broken.
But what happens is they go to the training, they come back, they go, hey, this is what I learned. Shut up.
Yeah.
Get back.
Right. Oh, we're not doing it that way because we've always done it this way.
Yeah.
So like, that's not effective. So again, just going back to building membership and building this advocacy for everybody. I think you guys are really onto something. What can I do besides this to help you guys? Like what is it that I can do to contribute to this thing? Because again, going all the way back to the beginning, the cop I want showing up on our worst day or my worst day or my mom's worst day or my daughter's worst day is the one that's informed, intelligent, equipped, and capable.
I'll let him answer first and then I'll give my thoughts on that.
And my answer is going to go back to, I think you said this before about what people in general can do. What I was going to say is vote.
I knew you were going to say that.
Vote. You got to vote. Vote Republican. Vote because...
That's coming back to you.
Yeah.
It's coming back.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. because it matters. The laws matter. Not just for you said it's boring. Yeah, talking about legal stuff is boring unless you're a force nerd.
It's not sexy.
It's not sexy, but it matters. It probably is up there on how much it matters, not just to the cop, but to the citizen. And I said it before, citizens lost out on this too. It changed the way that we respond to calls, or it should have. If it hasn't, if you're an officer walking around and it hasn't for you, there's an issue.
I think you guys did a pretty good job at articulating that.
Yeah. So you've lost out. Your risk profile of victimization has greatly increased. So you need to vote. And when law enforcement groups, if you don't know the bill, look at who the law enforcement, what they are opposed to and what they're advocating for. And if you want to lower your risk profile, you should probably err on the side of what law enforcement is advocating for, because that hasn't been happening in California. And look where we're at.
Yeah.
This state is a John Carpenter movie, you know.
That's a really good way of describing it.
It is. It's a John Carpenter movie.
Wild.
Yeah.
It's wild.
Yeah. Similar to what Kenny was going to say, or what Kenny said, is I think that if you look at what happened and how we got here, it was largely based on misinformation. Okay. The most sensationalized police interactions that spurred the craziest violence were pushed into the media early with limited facts and inflated and fanned the flames of frustrated people, and then caused over time major sweeping
Changes.
legislative changes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Roland Fryer is a Harvard economist who has done several studies. One of his studies talks about consent decrees and police reform. It shouldn't matter, but it does. Roland Fryer is a black man. His hypothesis in one of his studies is that, well, the outcome of one of his studies on police reform, specifically consent decrees, is that police reform negatively impacts communities of color and doesn't positively impact communities of color.
Every time, correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes.
Every single time.
And how it does that is by when you increase reform measures and government, like oversight and accountability, structures on police, you decrease police contacts with the public. Because as we talked about earlier, there's no affirmative duty for me to do anything during my patrol shift, right? I don't have to get out of my car and talk to you. I don't have to make car stops. If I have to go to the call for service, but I don't necessarily, how I go, quotations, is phone call, whatever. So communities that are affluent, they're going to get their police. But communities that are struggling in inner city, San Francisco, Oakland, San Jose, I guess in some cases, or certain enclaves. We
always get left out. This shit here is pretty wild, man.
Yeah. No, it is. I grew up in Salinas, so I'm aware.
Yeah. You are aware.
Yeah. The police are going to decrease their interactions with the public. And when you decrease your interactions with the public, crime goes up. The victims of those crimes are largely Black and brown people. Okay. So the people that get hurt are the same people that you were trying to protect. What can you do? You could do the same exact thing that people did in order to get these police reforms done in the first place, right? We talked about carotid restraint. The carotid restraint bill, executive order signed by Gavin Newsom, then bill, was not based on any factual evidence. It was based on a feeling. It was based on the fact that certain people didn't like the word choke. They didn't like the way it looks. And they convinced a governor through their grassroots measures to take it away. And he did. What people don't realize is that was the most humane police technique that exists to end a confrontation. You can turn off the human computer by decreasing oxygenated blood to the brain. I know it sounds violent.
So that's the thing. It sounds violent to some, but Coyote,
Yeah, it's down the street.
GJJ
They do it every day.
No, they don't just do it every day. They'll do it 50 times a day.
Yeah.
You go in there, right? I don't know what time it is right now. It's the world team.
Yeah.
It's probably finishing up practice right now.
Choke each other out every day.
Every single day.
Kids
Every
that
day.
do it
All day.
We choke each other. We train jujitsu. I'm a purple belt. I do it for fun.
Okay.
5 o'clock in the morning.
It's not violent.
We train.
It's not violent. It's
So-
actually very normal.
Right.
And actually Yeah.
So not getting into that tangent, but much of what we did out of knee-jerk reactions, baseless information, no studies, and it dramatically impacted the quality of life of California citizens.
Yep.
When you walk around a major city in California, you feel the change
100%.
because we're in the midst of an experiment. Cool. We thought that we knew better and we thought that we could do things a certain way. We voted on them 10 years ago. We started with AB 109. We went to Prop 36.
Prop 36, Prop 47.
Prop 47.
Yep.
And now here we are about 10 years, 12 years, 15 years down the road. And we're finally starting to feel the effects of those things. Vote, but most importantly, be informed, right? Like police shootings. I don't know if you know this. You probably do because you surprised me. But do you know how many people that police in America get in, like officer-involved shootings a year?
No, it's a fairly low number.
Shot and killed. Do you know?
No.
Can you guess? Just based on what you see in the media and whatnot.
I'm going to say sub 50.
Oh, wow. That's crazy. No, it's about 1,000 Americans a year, right?
Wait. The question is what?
How many people the police kill in an officer-involved shooting?
Kill. I didn't think it was that many.
Yeah, it's about 1,000 a year. But if you ask certain people, and I do this as when we do our teaching class for the citizens, I ask, and people are like 30,000, 50,000, right? No, it's about 1,000 people a year. Well, you're talking about 60 million, I think, or 50 million police contacts a year. 50 million police contacts a year. So 1,000 out of 50 million. Then you take into consideration that out of that 1,000, 99% of the people that die in an officer-involved shooting in America are armed at the time of the shooting. Okay? If we break that 1,000 down into demographics, it's about, on average, every year, 300 Asians are largely not represented. It's about 300 white, 300 Mexican, 300 black, and then other, right? Controversial, okay? But this is true and factual. The media concern is that, and you hear it, I just heard it, I was listening to something the other day. Police interactions are the largest threat of people of color in this nation, okay? If you take into account for, and this is another Roland Fryer study, where he did a study looking for racial bias in police shootings.
I remember this one.
And he thought that he was going to.
They redid it
Twice.
Yeah, twice.
Right?
Yep.
With completely different research assistants. And he found that there's no bias. He also talks about if you account for the fact that police come in contact with armed people more commonly in communities of color, there should be a higher incidence of shooting, right? But that's not the case. So what information are you getting? Where is the information coming from? What are the motives of the information, right? Research deeper. Go to your police department. Ask them, right? If an electrician we're the only profession that if we're doing a job, everyone thinks they know how to do our job better, right? If you hired an electrician to wire your kitchen lights. And
Depends on if you're talking to my dad or not.
Right. You wouldn't be standing over his shoulder being like, no, I don't like what you did. You didn't do that right? With your cell phone camera out, recording him. But for some reason with police officers, we do. So advocate for your community, but know what you're talking about, right? And go to the source. Go to police departments largely have community engagement stuff going on now. They're way more willing to talk to you about things, but you got to go to the source, you know? So.
Yeah, I think it's good advice. And I think a lot of people are disenfranchised from that, and have been over the last couple of years. But at the same time, they're recognized. When I say that, I just mean the voting and them actually being able to affect change. And I think the one place you can't affect it is locally, in your cities, municipalities. The disenfranchisement piece, I think, is now showing up. And we will see. This is a very interesting time for a lot of reasons. But even like in my local municipality, specifically neighborhood, specifically district, city district, and even those folks that maybe were less informed, that voted a certain way going back 10 years, that then voted maybe the same way the next couple of years, are now living in the consequence of the way that they voted. And they're starting to realize, like, this shit's fucked up.
Yeah.
Like, we're in a bad spot right now, and it's impacting everybody, including me. I've got people in my front yard, I've got, my car's been broken into, the local businesses are going away. There's blight just kind of everywhere. Like, businesses aren't moving in.
Yeah.
Like, something's up. Like, what is going on?
Here's one thing to consider when people say, well, crime's not going up, right? Statistically, crime hasn't gone up. You have to consider that the only way to track whether or not crime is going up is through documented arrests and police reports. Fair?
Yeah, man, I know exactly where you're going with this.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if the police are arresting people less because they're afraid of what's going to happen if they use force, what happens to the numbers?
They 100% go down. The other part about this is things have been made not a crime.
Or you decriminalize everything.
Yeah, if you decriminalize stuff, they're going to stop coming. And then you know what else happens next? So initially, the narrative around the neighborhood was, you got to call the police on everything. Got to call the police on everything. And I'm like, okay, if you think that's going to work, that's fine. Because then what I watched happen is that people started calling, and the police showed up when they could. Right? They were first pissed, like, dude, I called the cops like 3 hours ago. Yeah, for a homeless person in your yard, they got other shit going on, man.
Yeah.
Like, there's a lot of other things going on here in case you weren't aware, but clearly you aren't. So yeah, I understand where your concern is. Well, then maybe escalates into somebody that's not just in their yard, but they're trying to get in their front door or whatever. Okay, now they show up, right? And when they show up, it's like, okay, so that person's going to jail, right? Nope. They just get asked to leave. Yeah. If they come back, we can serve them up with maybe a trespass, but they're not going to jail for this. So then the next part, to your point, is guess what the neighborhood stops doing? They stop calling the police. Yep. Because they realize, like, nothing's going to happen. Yeah. So they just start to deal with it. So now you have less calls, you have less cops. Well, first off, you have decriminalization of all kinds of stuff. Then you have less calls, and then you have the cops that are going out there arresting less people as a result of two of those things, and the being afraid they're going to get into some shit.
Yeah.
Or you get it to where,
and here we are.
Yeah. Or you get it to where they go, your car broken into. Yeah. You can online report that.
We'll send out the CSO.
You're like, I'm not doing that.
We'll send out the CSO. They don't even show, and then they may show up by the end of the day.
Do you think that the people who are in office that dreamed up this path, do you think that they are just ignorant to what the consequences are, or do you think that there's a reason?
I think it's both. I think it's a bit of both. Yeah, but I think it stands more in ignorance than the latter. But I think at some point that ignorance becomes lessons, and then they realize the situation they're in, and then it becomes the next thing. And I think actually that happened over a long period of time. And now I think there is more of the agenda side of things. And I think the only way you're going to get in there is if you support or you're with that agenda, and that's where we're at. So I think it started as that. I think there's a lot of people, and I've had interactions, I think there's a lot of, people that are willing to participate and get involved and truly enter into that with the right intentions and the right frame of mind. And then they maybe get quickly caught up in what the reality of it is. I'm very disenfranchised from it. I gotta be honest with you. I think if you're in politics right now, you have some serious questions you should be asking yourself. I have very little trust, based on the things that I see, and and I've experienced as a business owner, as a citizen, as a taxpayer, I have very little trust. So if you're not willing to come in and try to earn that first, and you just want to tell me about all the cool things you're going to do,
I'm going to put a vending machine in the
brother.
lobby.
I hosted there's an open district council seat here, in our district here, and I hosted like all the candidates. Like, hey, you can come here and speak. Come in. Let's hear what you have to say, and let everybody else make their decision.
Think?
I'll be honest, and this is the first time I've said this out loud publicly. It was disgusting, and what I quickly found is the complete level of disconnect by the candidates at a lot of levels. There was one that I actually really liked. I won't say his name, but he comes with a very different background than the rest of them, and he was discounted immediately because of that background. And he was probably very much comes from similar backgrounds as you guys. And
if I can ask you a question, not to push back on you at all, I'm hijacking this podcast.
Go ahead.
Weird.
If what you can do is affect change in the local level, why would you not say his name if you liked him?
I think it's more like I liked him. I don't know that I'd have voted for him.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah, fair.
I thought he was the most honest and the least ignorant.
Yeah.
In a way, but I also saw that there was some influence that was happening there that I couldn't get on board with, and that's probably more why I don't want to say it.
Yeah.
So I guess my point in saying that is my experience with that it was very unreal, and what I mean by that, it wasn't transparent.
Yeah,
it was a pretend.
Yes,
and there was posturing. And when faced with the hard questions weren't really getting answered. And I need you to answer the hard questions very directly.
Yeah.
And not with, not reaching back to a 4-point agenda to do it with.
Yeah.
Like, just fucking be honest with me, dude.
Yeah.
Like and I don't see any of that. So going back to trust and being honest, but also on the other side were those that were supporting or representing these candidates, the exact same thing. And look, man, I didn't just fall off the turnip truck. I can smell bullshit from my bullshit meter's pretty good, and my nose is pretty good, and it's just too much of it. And I get like it's politics, yeah, but politics doesn't have to be fake. Correct. Politics doesn't have to be dishonest.
Right.
The best thing I think we can have in politics is people that understand their differing points of view, and they can still have a conversation about it and be open and honest about it, but professional at the same time. And I just don't get that at any level, at any sense. So again, going back to voting and whatnot, I'm disenfranchised in the sense that I feel like I'm voting these days for the lesser of two evils, that I'm not having my interests represented. So I'm having to navigate through this sticky web of who's the cleanest dirty shirt, right? And that's not where I want to be. And I believe a lot of people think that right now and are feeling that exact same way. So we're torn. We want to participate and contribute with our civic duties. But we're also going like, wow, what am I really doing here though? Like, I don't feel good about this. We want to feel better about it. That's all.
I think that we struggle with that in a lot of different ways. I mean, I think my personal experience in listening to candidates the same way, like as you have candidates from whatever, I don't know, whatever they're running for, come in and speak, is my experience has been very much the same. It's just listening to them and hearing them. It's like, this is so canned. Everything is canned. It's not authentic. It's not real. But we also deal with that in law enforcement also. And I think it comes from, I'll tie it back to what we do is like, it comes down to like human motivation.
Yep.
You want the position so badly that you're willing to sacrifice of your ethics. And I don't mean like right and wrong ethics. I mean your intrinsic value system, right? In order to get the win, right? Well, we deal with the same thing with police chiefs within law enforcement. We deal with the same thing sometimes with sheriffs within law enforcement. Is the motivation, if you're a police chief, to maintain your job. The average lifespan of a police chief is like 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me at all. I mean, we lost 1 year that I wished could have stayed here 10.
Yeah, but he fell out of favor, right? That fear in it. So then you add on to that, like the amount of money that you get paid is astronomical.
Yeah, it's a huge
So
motivator.
if you go from being a schlepping beat cop like me, making 150,000 or whatever it is, to now you're making 300,000 as a police chief because you promoted up the ranks, 300, 400, 500,000 as a police chief with a severance package. And you're like, babe, this is life-changing money. I'm able to buy you that new Lexus you want.
Sure.
Right? Like, let's take a trip, you know? The pressure to keep that at all costs is very, very high.
It'll fray.
And then all of a sudden you're now put in a position where, let's say you have a sensationalized shooting. What are you going to do? Right? You're going to say something that's not favorable to the city council, that is not in favor of what happened, but they don't understand the legal aspects of it. They don't understand that it's completely justified because of certain factors that they're unaware of because they can't see the investigation, because there's certain rules that tell us we can't share with you all of the investigation facts. So now you're in a situation, what do you do? Right? And we see over and over again.
Integrity is compromised.
The integrity is compromised.
Yeah, and then we wind up in the same circle as we always do, and then they're never there long enough to stand accountable for the decisions that were made while they're there.
Well, at some point, after the years, right, like either 3, 4, 5 years, at some point the police officer DNA starts to kind of creep out, and it may not be on a sensational shooting, but it can be on like one thing and then another thing. This all of a sudden, council's like, we don't like this guy. Let's get another guy in, you know? So then you just get another guy in. The guy does the same thing and the same thing and the same thing. It's like, gone are the years where you have a police chief that's working at the police department for 10, 15 years.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah, I think solid advice just and also just in reflection, kind of walking through and being very real about kind of where people are and how to think about things when it comes to voting and when it comes to being informed, which I think was my two major takeaways.
Yeah.
You know, obviously be informed before you vote or get informed so that you can go vote in the way that you think it's going to influence things the best, and do what feels right? Do the right thing. Which was, I think, another key takeaway. You know, for me, when I'm listening to you guys and kind of what you're doing, and again, I have a lot of interaction with first responders and police officers all kind of across the country in one form or another. Some are friends, some are just acquaintances, some I get to train with, whatever the case is. I think this message is something, or the message that you guys have brought to the table and what you're doing with your organization is something worthy of continuing to talk about at some level. So when I ask the question, what can I do to help? Whatever it is that I can do for you guys. I don't know what that would be. Like, we'll put this out there, you know, we'll cut some clips for you guys. Maybe you can post them if there's a clip you guys want posted, you know, like cut or whatever, we can do all that stuff. You know, we can tag the people, do the social media thing and all that stuff. But if stuff comes up, I want to know what that is, because it's easy for me to reach out and touch people, you know, make connections, whatever else. I'll go away marinating about this, going like, where could I fit into the solution finding process here? But I love where you came at this with your goals. Look, they are very, very obtainable goals, and the amount of work that I see you guys putting in, I really don't see any reason why you couldn't do that. I mean, who's pushing back right now? You know, all I see is people pushing forward.
Right.
That's very positive, and I think it's super encouraging. The information you guys are able to bring to the table just to help me understand kind of the history of the legal battles that particularly here as a nation, but here as we are in California, that helps me then articulate the message better as I'm out there talking to people, whether it's on this platform or otherwise. And so for that, I really appreciate you guys and taking the time to do that. Because it's tough to wade through and sift through all that stuff as just a dude.
Vote, is it yes on Prop 36? Is it yes? Yeah,
Okay.
vote yes on Prop 36. That's a big one.
Okay.
So
just in signing off here, just where do people go to find out more, to get more information, to sign up, to become a member? Who wants to take that role?
You can go to our website, www.calfia.org, CALFIA.org. We also have our CalForce instructor Instagram page. You can see some stuff that we've done on that. And that's...
Yeah. I mean, a word on that is that you got to be active retired law enforcement and or a law enforcement, like partner,
contractor or something like that.
Like somebody in the industry, like if you're teaching, if you're teaching cops or you're doing something,
lawyer, doctor, something like that. That's dealing with issues related to use of force that push our agenda. Then that's where we're at. But
I get it. That makes sense to me. It's sort of exclusive in a sense, and that makes perfect sense given what you guys are doing. So that
our website, Ken manages the website. Our website is secured and has a back end for members. So when once you become a member, you can go. The value of it is $50 a year. You go onto our website, you get a login username. You can log in, access the back end, and then on the back end, there's all sorts of instructional videos, all of our previous recorded conferences and presentations. Not all, but a lot of our keynote stuff. Ken does a monthly newsletter with all sorts of different legal updates, as well as different current events as it relates to use of force. And then our monthly Zoom meetings every month, first Wednesday of the month, we have a different presenter will come on, short, bite-sized, digestible presentation. And then yearly, the conference, the 3-day conference, and it alternates between Northern California and Napa and Southern California and Orange County every year. But last 2 years were about 200 attendees as far as students go, plus instructors, plus, I mean, it's much like any other conference you've been to, trade show, vendors,
fun.
Things like that. You can come and set up a podcast if you want to.
I appreciate that. When is it?
August 6th through 8th.
So next year,
2025, August 6th through 8th.
And is this the SoCal or the Napa one?
NorCal. We're going to be at Napa.
Oh, it makes sense.
Napa College.
I'm in.
Yeah,
I'm absolutely in. Just listening to you go through all that, man, that's a ton of value for $50.
Yeah.
And if it keeps me out of jail, right, it keeps me out of the courtroom. Why wouldn't I want to do this? But more importantly, just in terms of the amount, the effort that you guys are putting in, but the amount of material you guys are able to put out, and it's always about like a few humans that are just really working hard to get the thing done. But it takes a village to get it all done. You guys have done it in a fairly short period of time. It started with talking to people. I hope that this message reaches, a few more of the people like that. Particularly in my home state here in California, in the county I live in Santa Clara County, because those are the dudes and the dudes and the ladies that are looking after, my family and my friends, out there, that they somehow reach out and find you guys. There's a couple of other folks I might put you in touch with to get you guys in that talk to more of the leadership types in the groups that they train and they work with. So I can give you that stuff off air, and maybe you guys can all make that connection. But guys, I really appreciate your time. It's been a little bit of a long one, and if people stuck in there this long for this conversation, I hope you were able to pull something out of this. I know I was. You'll hear me reference this podcast quite frequently, I'm sure, going forward in other podcasts and kind of the things that I've learned.
It's funny because this is really only this is the third one I've done, but like the second time that I've done a long one. And we laugh afterwards. I always feel like like Will Ferrell in the debate at old school. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm like, I don't know how this turned out, but we'll see it later.
They always turn out, man. And that's just it. Like what we talk about, we talk about, and it goes as long as it goes. And no, this one was good. And again, selfishly, like I got a ton out of this. So I pulled a ton of value out of this. And I think about who the conversations are. And I said like you'll hear me reference this on future podcasts. But when I'm talking to my oldest daughter who's 22, or I'm talking to my mom and dad who are, my dad's in his 80s, mom's in her late 70s now, and the thoughts and the ideas that they have in their own head about what's going on out there. Sometimes I really struggle in having those personal conversations with people, and I just kind of shut things down. Like, I don't want to get into this.
Yeah.
But a lot of it is because I don't have a quick way to get to a better answer or to a better place in the discussion. And with regard to maybe providing some information to have them maybe have a little bit of a different perspective. This is one of those conversations like, dang, like you guys made it easy. Like with regard to providing information, like, okay, well, if I had to provide a quick history of how we got to where we're at, you guys just outlined that pretty fast.
Yeah.
In a way that I feel confident kind of talking. So that's valuable to me because I'm not trying to change people's minds. That's what this podcast is about. Maybe just getting people to think a little bit differently and stretch the brain.
Yeah.
That's what you said.
Yeah.
So thanks, guys. I appreciate you guys both.
Thank you. Appreciate you having us here. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, bud.